FBI detective, this video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 651, Special Investigation Team Office Area. Luo An took the folder, frowned and asked, "What do you mean by to be eliminated?" Verines chuckled and asked back, "In this building, have you seen the agents of the Special Investigation Team or the office area of the Special Investigation Team?" Luo An was stunned for a moment. He had not paid close attention to this matter before. When Verine said it, he remembered that, although he knew that there was a Special Investigation Team, the people in the 13th Investigation Team had basically never seen them on weekdays. Seeing that Luo An was a little confused, Verine smiled and explained, "The Special Investigation Team, as the name suggests, is an investigation team specially established to handle certain cases. Most special investigation teams need to cooperate with many other law enforcement departments in the process of handling cases, such as the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives, ATF, the Bureau of Destruction and Explosives, D, etc. Compared with other ordinary investigation teams, special investigation teams are more like multi-department joint action investigation teams, and often coordinate and recruit agents from other law enforcement departments temporarily according to specific cases. The FBI would recruit people from the D and other departments, and the D and other departments would sometimes recruit FBI agents, which resulted in a large number of members in most special investigation teams. The office space inside the FBI Washington headquarters is very expensive, and it is impossible to free up so much space for so many people. Verines explained. So, these special investigation teams have been looking for places and building their own office areas outside to handle cases. Over time, these special investigation teams are basically gathered in one building, that is, the tall building 800 meters west of the FBI Washington headquarters. After Verine's introduction, Luo An suddenly realized that when he first came to the FBI Washington headquarters, he was still wondering what company was inside the building when he passed by it and why there was no sign. Looking down at the documents carefully, Luo An found that in addition to requiring him to lead the special investigation team to find a place to build an office in the building, there was also a rent allocation. Because the building was owned by the Federal Department of Justice, these special investigation teams still had to pay rent to work in it. The rent is usually paid by the main department behind the special investigation team. Luo An and others are from the FBI, so the money is naturally allocated by the FBI. In addition, the funds allocated in the file are a bit too much, and the proportion is roughly allocated according to the office area of 15 people. Luo An's investigation team number 13 currently has only 6 people, including him. Considering that there is a high probability that members of other law enforcement departments will be temporarily transferred in when encountering new cases in the future, Luo An closed the folder and smiled at Verines. "Thank you, sir." Verines smiled and took a sip of coffee. The two continued to chat for a while, and Luo An got up with the folder and returned to the office area of the investigation team number 13. The operation to arrest Searles this time cost a lot of money to handle the case, and Luo An still needed to sort out the documents and report them to Verines. "Thank you for your hard work, everyone." Winslow and Lassie had already returned to investigation team number 13. Everyone was gathered together chatting. Roan pushed the door open and walked in, attracting everyone's attention. He waved his hand and said directly, "Tomorrow and the day after tomorrow will be a holiday. Everyone should have a good rest." Winslow and Chenia's eyes lit up immediately. Michelle was also surprised, and Lassie shouted excitedly, "Long live Roan, you are so handsome." Mona was also very happy. She took the file from Roan's hand. She frowned slightly. "The office area of investigation team number 13 has been cleared." "What?" Lassie's cheering paused. Winslow and others were also slightly stunned. Roan smiled and waved his hands. "Don't think too much, it's not a bad thing." After listening to Roan's description, everyone present was relieved. Chenia began to check the specific contents of the file with Mona. Lassie next to her thought for a while and said with a strange look, "Roan, I have a question. you say? Why do we always change venues? Lassie counted on her fingers. From the 5th investigation team in New York, to the special investigation team in Los Angeles, to the 13th investigation team in the Washington headquarters, and now I'm going to the special investigation team. It seems that we have never been in the same place for more than a year. Luo An was also a little speechless. After thinking for a while, he smiled and said, think about it from another angle. We have been driving new cars and using new equipment. When he was in New York, Luo An earned a lot of equipment for the 5th investigation team, such as laptops, new cars, etc., and they were all left in New York when he left the 5th investigation team. When he was in Los Angeles, Luo An earned more things for the special investigation team, including brand new cars and SUVs, weapons and equipment, and even tables, chairs, and benches. When he left Los Angeles for Washington, Luo An did not waste these things. He resold them all to Morton New York, the leader of the 4th investigation team, at a 10% discount. Morton New York was helpless and speechless about this, because those tables, chairs, benches, and even whiteboards were originally given to Luo An by them at the beginning, but Luo An actually sold them back to them. Later, the 13th investigation team was established. The equipment in the office area of the FBI Washington headquarters building, including computers, desks and chairs, were allocated by Mr. Clement. Luo An only had the right to use them, but not the ownership. However, Luo An just asked casually, and Vereen said that these equipment could be taken to the special investigation team later, and there was no need to buy them again, which successfully saved a sum of money. After playing for a while, everyone packed up and left the office area and drove back to their respective residences or 3-story villa in a community northwest of the FBI Washington headquarters. Finally back. After putting on her shoes and walking into the living room, Mona leaned forward and buried herself in the sofa, her body limp, and she made a comfortable sound. It's still comfortable at home. Yes, yes. Luo An, who had also changed into slippers, laughed and leaned directly beside Mona, squeezing Mona off the sofa, and sighed, I've been exhausted these days. Mona, who was squeezed to the ground, was stunned for a moment, and then she reacted and pulled a pillow and threw it at Luo An with a face full of dissatisfaction. Don't hit me. I was wrong. Luo An smiled and quickly raised his hand to block Mona's pillow. My injury hasn't healed yet. In the previous battle, Luo An was shot in the shoulder. Although the bullet was removed and bandaged afterwards, in order not to attract other people's attention, Luo An did not take the regeneration potion, and the wound on his shoulder was still tightly wrapped with a bandage. Humph. Mona snorted lightly. Of course she remembered this, so she didn't intend to use force. She took the pillow and gently hit Luo An's head. She got up and walked to the kitchen and asked, what are you eating tonight? I'll make it. How about eating outside later? I'm too tired. I finally got home and don't want to go out. Then beef and potatoes? Okay, I'll add 2 lamb chops. After the discussion, Mona's chef Luo An occasionally helped her on the side. After the food was ready, the two began to enjoy dinner. After opening a bottle of milk and checking to make sure it was not expired, Roan poured it into a cup and walked back to the table and asked casually, have you contacted Caroline recently? Yes. Mona picked up a piece of beef with a fork and said while eating, she is studying to start a company. What company? It seems to be a clothing design company. Mona replied, she wanted to get me to invest, but I didn't agree. They chatted while eating dinner, and after a short break, they went back to the house to rest. The next morning, Roan was fiddling with the computer when he suddenly received a call. Good morning, Mr. Greenwood, it's me, Michael Bray. Do you have time? We need to meet. Chapter 652, An Unexpected Gain on Wall Street. New York, a cafe on a street outside Wall Street. This cafe is not big, and soft piano music is playing. Luo An and Michael Bray are sitting face to face at a round table in the deepest part of the cafe. There is no one else here except them. Michael Bray is the head of Air Capital on Wall Street. Luo An had asked him for help before and bought financial products that shorted federal real estate. Chapter 575. The coffee in this cafe is very good. It is real Blue Mountain coffee. Michael Bray picked up a metal spoon and stirred it in the coffee cup and smiled. Except for being expensive, there is no disadvantage. Blue Mountain Coffee, one of the most expensive coffees in the world. Luo An picked up the coffee cup and took a sip. After smacking his lips, his brows frowned slightly. It's okay. The taste is dense and rich, which is Luo An's first impression of Blue Mountain Coffee. Moreover, the sweetness, sourness, and bitterness of coffee itself are matched in moderation, so it is not bitter at all, only a sour taste that is hard to describe. Luo An has always been sensitive to sourness and doesn't like to eat sour things on weekdays. Blue Mountain Coffee is indeed expensive and tastes good, but the sour taste that is always lingering in the mouth makes Luo An really dislike it. After taking a sip, Luo An did not continue to taste it. He simply chatted for a few words and introduced the topic and asked with a smile, "What do you want me to do today?" Seeing this, Michael Bray did not waste any more words. He looked around to make sure that there was no one around. He coughed lightly and leaned forward, lowering his voice and asked, "Team leader Luo An, have you heard of Bernard Madoff?" Luo An raised his eyebrows. He was very familiar with this name. In the previous Ponzi scheme case, and when Director Elmer came to him for help, although he had never met Bernard Madoff specifically, he had never forgotten this name. With a thoughtful look in his eyes, Luo An nodded and replied, "Bernard Madoff is the former chairman of Nasdaq. Of course I have heard of him. Since team leader Luo An knows, I will not introduce him again." Michael Bray moved his chair to Luo An's side, and his voice was lower than before. "Team leader Luo An, Bernard Madoff has recently been selling CDS through internal channels. But the price he sells is only 2/3 of the market price. You know what CDS is, so I won't say much. I came to you today to ask you if you would like to pay more to buy CDS from Bernard Madoff. After all, it's a rare opportunity." Luo An's eyebrows jumped. When he heard the name Bernard Madoff, he would subconsciously think of the word Ponzi scheme. Director Elmer has already launched an investigation and evidence collection activity against Bernard Madoff, but has not yet arrested him. Today, after hearing Michael Bray say that Bernard Madoff was selling CDS at a low price, Ron's first reaction was twofold. Either Bernard Madoff's capital chain had problems and he started selling financial products to recover funds, or Bernard Madoff may have noticed something was wrong and was preparing to do something. 1,000 thoughts flashed through his mind in an instant, but Ron's expression remained unchanged. He did not immediately answer Michael Bray, but asked, "Where did you get this news?" Michael Bray thought Ron doubted the truth of the matter and had some concerns, so he immediately patted his chest and said that there was absolutely no problem, and then lowered his voice and said, "In Wall Street, stocks are not valuable, but information is the most valuable item. As long as there is demand, there will be a market, and information is no exception. So on Wall Street, information is also a commodity on the shelf, and it is more expensive than stocks." Ron frowned slightly. Since information can be sold, it is probably no secret that Bernard Madoff is engaging in a Ponzi scheme. Luo An shook his head and smiled silently in his heart. Sure enough, there are no fools on Wall Street. They are all smart people, but these smart people are more greedy. Michael Bray took a sip of coffee. "So, this is a rare opportunity. Team leader Luo An, do you want to continue to invest in the purchase?" Luo An shook his head. "Thank you for the information, but no need." Luo An also has greed in his heart, likes money, and likes to see the numbers in his account increase. But compared to greed, Luo An is more cautious. Bernard Madoff has been targeted by Elmer, the director of the IS and the FBI, for engaging in a Ponzi scheme. As long as he is caught, all his assets will be frozen. No one knows whether Bernard Madoff has tampered with the CDS sold at a low price or which links. It's okay if he didn't, but once he tampered, it would be frozen by the IS at that time, which would be too pitfall, and it would be very troublesome later. Okay. Hearing Luo An's refusal, Michael Bray smiled and didn't care. He was just telling Luo An the news, and it was up to him to decide whether to buy or not. Michael Bray then took out a document from his briefcase, opened it and handed it to Luo An, introducing it. "This is the CDS product that you, team leader Luo An, purchased, and the premiums for the past 2 months, etc." The premiums for the past 2 months were $1.35 million, and Michael Bray had already transferred the money to the bank. Luo An checked it for a moment and found that there was no problem, so he put the document away. Michael Bray then said that the CDS he had bought for Luo An before was BBB rated, which was the lower level. During this period, through buying low and selling high and exchanging in batches, Michael Bray successfully upgraded these BBB rated products to AA rated products. AA and BBB are the evaluation standards set by Wall Street rating agencies, with C being the lowest and AAA, 3A, being the highest. Taking out another folder and handing it to Luo An, Michael Bray smiled with some pride. Before, team leader Luo An, you used $450 million to purchase BBB level CDS products worth $3 billion. After the level was upgraded to AA level, the value of these products increased from the original $3 billion to $4.123 billion. In addition, during the transaction, $473 million of $450 million of CDS were sold, with a profit of $23 million, or $23 million. How does team leader Luo An plan to use this profit? Continue to invest in purchasing CDS, or take it away and transfer it back to your account? Wow. Looking at the numbers in the folder, Luo An's eyebrows raised immediately. He thought that the $450 million would be kept quietly for more than 10 months, waiting for the subprime mortgage crisis to break out and the real estate market to collapse. Unexpectedly, Michael Bray's operation was so sweeping that not only did he sell the low-level CDS to other buyers, but he also bought high-level CDS products to help Luo An upgrade his CDS products, and he also made more than $20 million for him during the sales process. With a smile on his face, Ron handed the file back to Michael Bray and said, "Continue to buy CDS products, you can handle it." Ron was now more and more certain that his original judgment was correct. It was indeed better and more useful to find a professional fund manager to help with investment than to go to the market blindly. The more than $20 million in product upgrades during this period were proof of this. No problem. Michael Bray took the folder back with a smile. He also got a commission for helping Ron make money, and the two of them were in a win-win situation. After chatting for a while, Michael Bray got up and left first. The saying that time equals money was completely literal to him. Ron left the cafe and got into the car. After a few seconds of hesitation, he took out his mobile phone, found a number and called it. The call was quickly connected, and a male voice came out. "This is Elmer. Chapter 653 System Harvest, Insomnia Building." More than 3 hours later, by the river in a park in Washington, D.C., Ron sat on a bench beside the path, fiddling with his computer. After waiting for a long time, a man walked over from a distance. "Sorry." Supervisor Elmer sat down next to Ron, let out a long sigh and said apologetically, "I was a little busy with the work at hand, so I came a little late. Understand?" Ron smiled and picked up a bottle of drink and handed it to him. The work intensity of the eyes is usually very heavy. As a supervisor, Elmer sometimes has more work to do. "Thank you." After receiving the drink, Supervisor Elmer thanked him, unscrewed the lid, and took a sip. He asked directly, "What do you want to talk to me about?" "Nothing. I just got a piece of news, but it's not convenient to talk over the phone." Luo An put down his computer and briefly recounted Bernard Madoff's sale of CDS products at a low price. Finally, he said, "Did you do anything to attract his attention?" "No, we definitely didn't attract his attention." After hearing the description, Supervisor Elmer's face suddenly turned black. After a brief silence, he shook his head to deny Luo An's inquiry, then stretched out his hand and shook Luo An's hand vigorously, and said seriously, "Thank you, Luo An. This news is very important to us." "You're welcome." Luo An smiled. This matter was just a by-the-way thing for him. Just as he was about to ask about other things, Supervisor Elmer's eyes suddenly lit up, and he asked first, "I heard that your investigation team number 13 has been upgraded to a special investigation team, and will move to the Insomnia Building, right?" "Insomnia Building?" Luo An raised his eyebrows, surprised and puzzled. Where did this nickname come from? It came from the people in that building. Elmer laughed and said, sometimes, wise people are temporarily seconded to work in that building. According to them, the people in that building are under a lot of pressure. Although the salary is high, because the case is complicated, they often work day and night, and long hours of overtime are the norm. 80% of people do not get enough sleep. If you don't get enough sleep, you need to make up for it. But if it happens too often, it will become more and more difficult to fall asleep, and eventually you will suffer from insomnia. So this building has the nickname of the Insomnia Building. Luo An's mouth twitched, and he was speechless. Supervisor Elmer smiled and continued, by the way, let me tell you something. When you go to that building to choose an office area, remember to choose the area from the 6th floor down. There are not many people in that building compared to many companies on the market, but law enforcement agencies will encounter emergencies and sometimes need to go out on a mission to arrest people. If you choose a floor that is too high, the elevator will most likely be stuck because it is being used by other departments, and you will eventually be forced to take the stairs. Luo An frowned slightly. I remember that building seemed to have more than 20 floors. Supervisor Elmer smiled and said, to be exact, it's the 26th floor. If you're really unlucky and the elevator gets stuck, you'll have to run down from the 20th floor. It's ridiculous to think about it. Okay, I understand. Luo An nodded with a smile and silently noted this matter. After a while, the two of them left. Supervisor Elmer went back to work, and Luo An drove back to the villa to rest. In the villa, Mona was hugging a pillow, curled up on the sofa and fiddling with the computer. When she saw Luo An coming back, she casually asked, where did you go just now? Did you bring back any food? I went to New York. Luo An replied casually, then sat down next to Mona and stretched his body. I didn't buy snacks. Let's go out to eat together in the evening. No, I don't want to go out. It's comfortable to lie at home. Luo An stood up and looked at Mona, smiling. Why do I feel that you have a tendency to develop in the direction of a stay-at-home girl? No way. Mona pushed Luo An. I just don't want to put on makeup. Okay. Moving closer to Mona, Luo An looked at her computer and asked, what are you doing? Mona's eyes flashed with embarrassment, and she hesitated for a moment and replied, I'm reading and learning knowledge. Luo An immediately guessed something and looked at Mona expressionlessly. Where is the knowledge again? From the Determination and Detection Agency, or the CIA? Mona smiled awkwardly. Neither. This time it's the BOP, Federal Bureau of Prisons. Luo An rubbed his temple helplessly, but Mona always knew the limit and knew where the line was, so she simply stopped asking and leaned over on the sofa to rest with her eyes closed while opening the system page in her mind. In the familiar light blue page, in bombing case and Cyril's case, the system gave Luo An evaluation of excellent, and he had accumulated a total of 20 treasure chests. He slightly moved his consciousness to open the treasure chest, and the rough cutscene ended. The 20 treasure chests contained Stamina Potion X3, Hemostatic Potion X4, Swiftness Potion X3, Analgesic Potion X2, Regeneration Potion X3, Featherfall Potion X4, Antidotes Potion X1. Then he opened the system warehouse page, which contained Stamina Potion X8, Hemostatic Potion X8, Antidotes Potion X6, Swiftness Potion X8, Regeneration Potion X7, Strength Potion X4, Sensitivity Potion X1, Analgesic Potion X8, Featherfall Potion X7, Aqualung Potion X3. He felt a little unhappy that none of the 20 treasure chests contained Danger Perception Potion. However, when he saw the number after Regeneration Potion turned into 7, he felt a little better. Roan. Just as Roan was thinking about the effects of these potions, Mona patted his thigh to divert his attention. Roan opened his eyes and asked, what's wrong? Mona handed Roan a calendar and said, 2 months from now is Lass's birthday. Have you thought about what gift to give her? Not yet. Roan remembered the basic information of everyone in the 13th investigation team in his mind. He naturally remembered Lass's birthday, but remembering it was one thing, but it was indeed a problem for Roan to know what gift to give. Fortunately, there were still 2 months to prepare, so Roan didn't have to rush for the time being. After a few discussions with Mona, he put the matter aside for the time being. The two finally went out for dinner in the evening because there were not many meat and vegetables at home and they needed to replenish them. After another day of rest, on the third day, Roan led the agents of the 13th investigation team to the building to select an office area. While walking inside the building, Roan observed carefully and did notice the problem with the elevator. Finally, according to the suggestion of Director Elmer, Roan chose an area at the deepest part of the 5th floor as the office area for the special investigation team. The next thing was to clean up, move equipment, and handle the document handover procedures. These things were not difficult but time consuming. In addition, there was no emergency, so the agents slowly cleaned up for 3 days. The cleaned up office area was more spacious and brighter than before. In contrast, the area planned for 15 people was a bit empty with only 5 people. Lassie touched her chin and thought about it, then clapped her hands and suggested, "How about we buy a few pots of green plants? They are beautiful and can purify the air." "I think so." Winslow nodded, and Chanel agreed. The few of them immediately gathered together to discuss the varieties of green plants. Michelle looked around and didn't see Roan, so she asked, "Where's Roan?" "He went to a meeting." Mona answered casually, "It seems to be related to Me6. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 654 Me6, Negotiation, 1.4 million. At 9:30 in the morning, in a conference room deep in the first floor of the FBI Washington headquarters. On the left side of the conference table stood 3 men and women in black suits with light blue tags around their necks. The leading man looked about 40 years old, tall and with a long face. The most noticeable thing was his hair, which was very sparse and just one step away from a Mediterranean hairstyle. Luo An took a quick glance at the 2 men and women behind him who looked slightly younger, then walked to Vereen's on the right side of the conference table, and said with a smile, "Good morning, sir." Vereen's looked at her watch. "You're late. We just moved to the building next door. The journey is too far, and there's some traffic." Luo An made up an excuse without blushing, saying that the distance of 800 meters was too far, and it would take time to drive. He could see that Vereen's was not angry, and this was just to give an explanation to the 3 people opposite. As expected, Vereen's nodded and didn't say much on this topic. She extended her hand to briefly introduce the 2 parties. Roan Greenwood, head of the Special Investigation Team. Martinez, from the British Embassy in the Commonwealth. The bald Martinez smiled and extended his hand to Roan. "Hello, Roan, head of the team." "Hello, Mr. Martinez." Roan grinned, showing a standard 8-tooth fake smile, and extended his hand to shake hands with the other party. Roan and Vereen's knew that they were from the embassy, but they were actually Me6. They were too lazy to expose each other. After the handshake, Roan asked directly, "I wonder if Mr. Martinez came to me today to ask if there is anything I can help with. Just tell me, I will do my best to help if I can." As expected of team leader Roan, who has superb case handling ability, "You are really quick-witted." Martinez smiled and praised Roan. The 2 sat down on the chairs and he said, "As far as we know, Sauls has been taken back to the Federation by team leader Roan, right? We hope that team leader Roan can cooperate with us to jointly interrogate Sauls." "Joint interrogation?" Roan raised his eyebrows and asked, "What information do you want to know?" "The female agent with darker skin? Sauls has confessed and admitted that she killed the other party, and she also told us the specific location. If Mr. Martinez needs it, I can give you the interrogation record. It's just a small matter to make a phone call. Mr. Martinez doesn't need to go there in person." Martinez frowned slightly. "We hope to interrogate Sauls alone." Roan nodded and smiled. "Sure, I can go to the monitoring room next door and keep an eye on Serals. I will never let her get up and hurt you." Team leader Luo An, "My men are all excellent, and it is impossible for Serals to hurt you. Do you underestimate Serals? She is a woman who can kill Me6 agents. I must be responsible for your safety." Seeing that Martinez was still beating around the bush in his words, Luo An also chose to play dumb, not understanding, not seeing, and not understanding. After a few rounds, Vereen sat next to him without saying a word, but the corners of her mouth raised an imperceptible arc. The smile on Luo An's face was sunny and bright, giving people a very friendly feeling. Martinez's face was stiff and full of black lines. The man and woman behind him also looked unhappy, looking at Luo An with eyes full of dissatisfaction. After staring at each other quietly for a moment, Martinez took a deep breath and finally stopped beating around the bush. He said in a deep voice, "Captain Roan, we hope to bring Serals back to our British Empire for interrogation. We also hope that you can cooperate with us." Roan grinned and asked, "What about the benefits?" Martinez was stunned for a moment. The man and woman behind him also widened their eyes. They didn't expect Roan to be so direct. In the end, Martinez reacted quickly. He immediately replied with a smile, "As long as you hand over Serals to us, Team Leader Roan will naturally gain the friendship of our British Empire." Vereen frowned slightly, while Roan showed a look of realization, and then laughed. "As long as Mr. Martinez stops talking to me about Serals, Mr. Martinez will definitely gain my friendship." Without waiting for Martinez to speak, Roan turned to Vereen and said, "Sir, the cost of the arrest operation against Serals has been calculated. The amount is 1.4 million, 2.4 million US dollars. When do you think this report will be sent to you? Let's talk about it later. Let's talk about business first." Vereen rolled her eyes at Roan. Roan smiled and nodded, and turned his attention back to Martinez and the other two. X3 at this time, Martinez's face had completely sank, and the two men and women behind him had docker faces. They all understood what Roan meant. They could understand asking for money, but the obvious price increase later was too much. After a light cough, Martinez said in a deep voice, "Team Leader Roan, our British Empire and the Federation have always cooperated closely in politics and economy, and the cooperation process is also very pleasant." Martinez said a lot. The overall meaning is that the British Empire and the Federation are good friends. Roan's behavior is not good. It will seriously damage the relationship between the two sides. Of course, Team Leader Roan is young after all. Martinez is magnanimous. He can ignore the small mistakes of these young people. As long as Serals is handed over to them, he will let bygones be bygones. Vereen narrowed her eyes slightly. Roan still smiled, and the smile became more kind and sunny, and said in a gentle tone, "Mr. Martinez, I can only say that in view of the current situation, looking at the overall situation, looking at the past and present, considering the average level of the Federation, analyzing and summarizing, it may be considered that, in summary, it may not be very pleasant to hear, anyway. The development of things is probably more subtle. A lot of long and difficult sentences plus nonsense were said for 3 minutes. Vereen was stunned. The two men and women stared, and Martinez's face was dark and his eyebrows were beating. "So, did you understand, Mr. Martinez?" Roan took a sip of coffee, smiled and asked, "If you don't understand, I can say it again." The air was quiet for a long time. Martinez and Roan looked at each other for a moment, suddenly slapped the table and stood up, opened the door, and took the two men and women out of the conference room. What a lack of manners. Closing the open door, Roan shook his head and walked back to the conference table, smiling. It seems that Mr. Martinez has become accustomed to blank votes, which is not good. It was the number you said that scared him. Vereen rolled her eyes at Roan, took a sip of coffee, and asked, "Is the cost this time definitely 1.4 million US dollars? No, it's actually 800,000 US dollars. Roan spread his hands. He just felt that the British Empire was the old overlord after all. Although it was getting worse and worse, it still had a lot of money. It was impossible for me to not be able to come up with that little money. It's indeed a bit too much." Vereen stood up, patted Roan on the shoulder, and said, "Give me the report, as soon as possible, the one with 1.4 million US dollars. Roan frowned slightly. "Do you really want to hand over Serals to the British Empire? We are the FBI, and can only follow the orders of the FBI. Vereen said calmly, "This kind of thing must follow procedures and takes time. In addition, the CIA will also interrogate Serals, and we cannot make decisions for the CIA." Roan grinned and silently gave Vereen a thumbs up. Chapter 655. Ponzi scheme explodes. Lass's party. He drove back to the Insomnia building without a hurry. He reached the end of the 800-meter distance with one step on the accelerator. Luo An took the elevator up and silently thought about how to write the $1.4 million report. Everyone, I'm back. Luo An walked into the Special Investigation Team's office area and greeted loudly. The responses that often appeared in the past disappeared. Luo An looked up and found that everyone was gathered at the small TV at the front of the office area. Luo An frowned slightly and walked over quickly. What's wrong? Something happened on Wall Street. Lassie swallowed her saliva, turned around and made room for Luo An, and said with a complicated expression, "Have you heard of Bernard Madoff? He is the former chairman of Nasdaq. He was arrested. In the past few decades, this guy has been engaged in a Ponzi scheme." On the TV, a live broadcast of Bernard Madoff being taken away was playing. Many reporters nearby held microphones and shouted like crazy to ask Bernard Madoff questions, but they were all stopped by the NYPD. Bernard Madoff himself lowered his head and said nothing. The white man escorting Bernard Madoff was a familiar face to Roan, Supervisor Elmer. Wow. Roan raised his eyebrows and sighed. He had just met with Supervisor Elmer a few days ago to discuss Bernard Madoff's sale of financial products at low prices. He didn't expect that he would start to act today. Nearly $50 billion, one of the largest funds in the world, is empty. The entire fund is even just a Ponzi scheme. On TV, the blonde female host was shocked and kept shouting God. Behind her, many people also shouted God, and more people cursed and greeted Bernard Madoff and his family with various words. This is really. In the office of the Special Investigation Team, Chanel and Winslow were shocked. They thought for a long time, but couldn't come up with a suitable adjective. Michelle next to them snorted coldly and said, "So, there are no good people in Wall Street. There are only liars and lunatics." Lassie was more concerned about another thing. She frowned and asked, how did this Ponzi scheme last for more than 20 years and never be discovered? As an insider and the guy behind the whole thing, Luo An said calmly, "No, it should not be said that it has not been discovered, but that it has only been exposed now. It is impossible for Director Elmer to promote this case and arrest alone, so Luo An had introduced Mr. Clement and FBI Director Robert to him before. The two discussed the matter with the IS director, and the three of them later brought in some top figures from other departments. The multi-departmental joint operation finally exposed the matter. Director Elmer was just the vanguard in the eyes of the public. This is also the reason why Luo An did not choose to participate in this matter. The factions behind it are complicated, and there are many camps. It is sometimes difficult to distinguish between enemies and teammates. Luo An is still young. Unlike Director Elmer, who lacks a strong background and great achievements, he has plenty of opportunities in the future and does not need to get involved in this matter. At the same time, Luo An also proposed to Director Elmer a plan to protect the funds of those middle-class families who were deceived to the greatest extent. Although it is impossible to get back all the defrauded funds, it is better than not getting almost a penny in the previous life. The live broadcast on TV continued, and the exclamations and inquiries of reporters and the scolding of passers-by in the background alternated. The office area of the Special Investigation Team was quiet, and everyone was silent and thinking. In the next few days, the front pages of major media outside were almost all occupied by this Ponzi scheme case that shocked the world. While the detectives of the Special Investigation Team were surprised and checked the follow-up development of the incident, they continued to deal with the follow-up of the explosion case and the Serrals case. There was still work to be done. On Friday, at 4:30 p.m., the detectives finished their work and began to rest, preparing to wait for the clock at the front of the office area to reach the end of get-off-work time. As the team leader, Luo An naturally had to lead by example, so he also walked out of the team leader's office and started chatting with the agents. Everyone, look at me, look at me." At this moment, Lassie suddenly coughed a few times and stood up, clapped her hands to attract everyone's attention, and said loudly, "I have something to announce." Luo An stuffed a nut into his mouth and asked with a smile, "What's wrong? Are you getting married?" "Almost, not far away." Lassie smiled, suddenly took out a few photos from behind, and shouted loudly, "Everyone! The house I bought has been renovated. Tomorrow, Saturday night, everyone come to my villa. We'll have a party. So soon." When Winslow was surprised, Chanel and Michelle were also very surprised. Lassie smiled and put her hands on her hips with pride. Federal people do not have a serious concept of new houses and old houses. Sometimes the same house will have many owners. For example, the house purchased by Hollywood actress Nicole Kidman and her husband when they got married had been owned by 3 generations before them. The house that Lassie bought was not a new one either. It had a previous owner before her. So after Lassie bought the house, she directly removed all the decorations of the previous owner and asked the decoration company to replace them with her favorite style and decorations. While everyone in the office was playing around, Lassie put her arm around Mona's arm and grinned at Luo An. "Let's borrow Mona tomorrow. I'm the only one in that house. The party needs to be prepared, and I need manpower." Luo An spread his hands. Since Mona agreed, he naturally wouldn't say anything. Suddenly, Luo An thought of something and asked, "In addition to the people in our investigation team, have you invited anyone else?" "Of course." Lassie nodded as a matter of course. "She also has her own social circle." Luo An raised his eyebrows. "Are they not all women? How is that possible?" Lassie looked unhappy. "Although I'm a lesbian, it doesn't mean that I don't make friends with men, okay? Okay." Looking at Winslow, who was secretly eating Lassie's snacks next to him, Luo An grinned and nodded. In the western part of Washington, D.C., there is a villa community. The villas here not only have independent lawns and trees, but also are far apart from each other. At 8:30 p.m. on Saturday, in a villa at the southernmost end of the community, restless music hummed and roared. Lassie, dressed in a neutral outfit, stood by the swimming pool, holding a microphone and shouted loudly, "Girls, get excited. Oh oh oh, Lassie, Lassie, Lassie." On both sides of the swimming pool, more than 30 beautiful girls in simple clothes applauded and cheered wildly. Lassie laughed, threw down the microphone, and rushed into the crowd like the wind, moving her hands up and down, and the scene was suddenly filled with girls' screams and teasing. X2 at the other end of the swimming pool, Ron and Winslow, sitting on beach chairs, were full of black lines on their heads. In the huge villa, in addition to Ron and Winslow, the 2 male characters, there was only a pet male dog brought by someone unknown, and a white man wearing an ordinary shirt and shorts, with grey hair and wrinkles on his face, who looked to be in his 60s, and wearing sunglasses at night. Luo An picked up his beer and clinked it with the strange man, then asked with a smile, "Nice to meet you. My name is Luo An." The man took off his sunglasses and said with a smile, "Just call me Piero. I'm Lassie's friend, and I'm a priest." Chapter 656, Liberation Theology, Mormonism. Pastor? Hearing this word, Winslow turned his head with surprise, and then his eyes were full of disbelief. Let's not talk about the identity of a pastor, which is somewhat inconsistent with Lassie's villa party, where there are more women than men and a restless mood. Judging from his dress alone, this elderly white man named Piero cannot be said to be well dressed, but can only be said to be unkempt. The loose shirt, loose shorts, and somewhat unruly slippers really don't match the image of a pastor in Winslow's mind. Luo An used emotional perception to determine that the other party was telling the truth, and asked with a smile, "Can pastors attend this kind of party?" "You misunderstood, kid." Piero took a big sip of beer, wiped his mouth and smiled. "I'm indeed a pastor, but not the pastors you imagine. I'm a gospel pastor of liberation theology." Liberation theology? Winslow was a little confused. He didn't study much about religion and only knew some of the most common basic differences between Catholicism and Christianity. Luo An was in awe when he heard this word. It was not because he admired Piero, but because he had heard of the theoretical concept of liberation theology. Whether it is Christianity or Catholicism, the core doctrine is that human beings are born sinful and need to be saved and redeemed. So, what is sin? The founder of liberation theology successfully combined the biblical theory with Marxist theory, saying that exploitation is sin, class inequality, capitalist pursuit of profit maximization, economic bloodsucking, etc. are sins. These sins are contrary to the doctrines advocated by God, so they need to be eliminated, that is, to defeat them and liberate mankind. The internal logic of liberation theology is self-consistent and well-founded. At first glance, it is indeed very easy to convince others. But Luo An understood the limitations of these religions and theories, so he ignored Piero's subsequent suggestions and asked directly, "When did you and Lassie meet?" "Don't be nervous, team leader Luo An." Piero smiled and said, "I'm Lassie's distant uncle. This time I passed by Washington DC, so I came to see her. When I chatted with Lassie these days, I found that Lassie admired and trusted team leader Luo An very much, and even worshipped her. You were worried that I would harm Lassie, and I was also worried that you would deceive Lassie, so I came to attend Lassie's decoration party." Emotional perception confirmed that the other party was telling the truth. Luo An raised his eyebrows and felt slightly relieved. He picked up the beer bottle and clinked it with the other party and began to chat about other things. In addition to some religious content, Piero's other thoughts were quite open. For example, Lassie's sexual orientation was not a problem in his eyes. Instead, he believed that it was a unique gift from God to Lassie. As for other aspects, Piero's cognitive viewpoint is not complicated. In summary, although I curse, drink, smoke, fight, and like women, I'm a good believer who firmly believes in God. After chatting for a while, Piero finished the second bottle of beer, picked up the third bottle of beer, opened the lid, raised it and clinked it with Roan, and expressed his gratitude to Roan with a serious face. Piero knew Lassie's financial situation very well. Before meeting Roan, although she was frugal, her salary was so much, and saving money could not make her rich quickly. So Lassie had always kept the matter of buying a house in her heart. Her main goal at that time was to pay off her college loans. Piero himself was not rich, and it was good enough that he did not hinder Lassie, and he could not provide her with any help. After meeting Roan and going to Los Angeles with Roan and Mona, Lassie's financial situation improved rapidly, and she even had surplus funds to transfer to Piero to help him. Piero blushed and snorted, "Thank you very much, team leader Luo An. It's my duty." Luo An smiled, and just when he was about to say something, Piero suddenly leaned forward and asked in a low voice, "Team leader Luo An, I can see that you are not very interested in the liberation theology I believe in. But I have many friends, one of whom is a Mormon pastor, the Mormon who allows polygamy and can marry as many wives as he wants. If you are interested, I can contact him and help you join the Mormon church." Luo An. The next day, Sunday, still resting and not working. Because the wound on his shoulder has recovered a lot, Luo An and Mona struggled for a long time before getting up and walking out of the bedroom after opening his eyes in the morning. The two made breakfast. When making lunch, Luo An's mobile phone suddenly rang. "It's me, Elmer." A familiar male voice came from the phone. It was Elmer, the supervisor of the eyes. "Good afternoon." Roan grabbed a prepared oyster and stuffed it into his mouth, smiling and saying, "Your news has been everywhere these days. It's really a big deal. If we make a list of the size of this year's news and the impact of the incident, then the Bernard Madoff Ponzi scheme case can definitely be ranked in the top 10. As the lead investigator of the case, Director Elmer naturally stole the limelight. Many media outlets have focused their attention on him, praising Director Elmer, while almost all of his personal resume has been dug out. Seeing this content in the newspaper, Roan is more and more certain that his original choice was correct. Director Elmer's resume over the years can only be said to be average, but he has been praised by the media as the most sensitive director of the eyes. If Roan really participated in this matter at the beginning, and his 100% case-solving rate was later exposed, who knows how much the media would accuse him. "Thank you for all these things, Roan." Elmer's voice on the other end of the phone was exhausted and could not be concealed, but his tone, when he spoke, was very energetic. After being arrested, Bernard Madoff was very cooperative and answered all questions. The interrogation did not waste much time. The only problem was the funds in the foundation. Elmer took on huge pressure and stipulated that the order of repaying the victims with the funds was arranged in alphabetical order, rather than the order of consortium banks first and middle class families later. When Luo An saw the news, he was worried that Director Elmer would be shot in the back and commit suicide one day. But in the end, Luo An was relieved because there were other people behind Director Elmer, which was the result of multi-party game. I can take a day off tonight. After a few simple greetings, Director Elmer smiled and said, "How about coming to my house for a meal? The lobster made by my wife will definitely make you drool." Then I must try it. Being invited by others to have dinner with their families has always been a sign of a close relationship in federal customs. Luo An did not refuse and agreed with a smile. "It's settled." Director Elmer laughed and continued chatting for a few more words before both parties hung up the phone. Roan reached out and patted Mona beside him, saying with a smile, "No need to cook tonight. Let's go to someone else's house to eat lobster." Mona asked casually while tidying up the tableau, "Is it Director Elmer from the eyes?" "Yes." Roan nodded. Director Elmer's invitation this time was obviously to express his gratitude, so of course he would not refuse. "Okay." Mona wiped her hands and sat at the dining table and started to have lunch with Roan, saying, "Then what gift should we bring when we go there tonight? How about red wine?" Roan answered casually, and at this moment his cell phone suddenly rang again. He pressed the answer button, and Verine's voice rang from it. "Roan, come to my office, now." Chapter 657 The Lost Horror Item. Sunday, 4:30 p.m. Special Investigation Team Office. In the open area at the far side, Winslow was exercising with dumbbells, and Chinell was counting push-ups not far from him. Michelle and Mona were sitting together fiddling with their computers, and Lassie yawned loudly at her workstation. She had a lot of fun last night, and hadn't rested well yet. "I hate working overtime." Lassie slumped in her chair, and looked at Mona listlessly. "Mona, do you know what's going on this time?" "I don't know." Mona spread her hands, and Roan was called to the office by Verinus, and she helped call the rest back. "Maybe there's another serial murder case somewhere." After Winslow finished a set of exercises, he put down his dumbbells, walked over and took a sip of water, and said, "This kind of thing happens every month in the federal government. Maybe it's another case that has been dormant for more than 10 years or even decades. Could it be a bank robbery?" Chenia next to him put forward her own idea. "When I rushed to this building just now, I saw on the news that another bank robbery occurred in southern New York, and the amount of money robbed was very large. That's New York. It's normal to have bank robberies. It would be abnormal if there were no bank robberies someday." Lassie complained speechlessly, and Michelle next to him analyzed seriously. "From the Special Investigation Team to the 13th Investigation Team to some time ago, we have handled many types of cases. This time, Verines was so anxious to call Luo An over, she should have taken a fancy to our experience. So this case should be of the same type as the cases we have handled in the past. But what kind is it specifically?" Lassie spread her hands. "Homicide, murder, serial murder, bombing, bank robbery. We have handled too many cases. We'll know when Luo An comes back." Mona smiled and patted Lassie's shoulder, saying, "I suggest you take a good rest now. When Luo An comes back, I'm not sure if I can rest tonight." "You make sense." Lassie nodded, quickly moved her chair back to her workstation, picked up her clothes, and put them on the table to prepare for sleep. But before she could lie down, the door of the Special Investigation Team's office was suddenly pushed open, and Luo An walked in expressionlessly with a strange woman. "Lassie. Everyone, let me introduce myself." Walking to the front of the office area, Roan briefly introduced everyone. "This is Ms. Modlin from the Federal Military. She will work with us on this case." "Hello everyone, my name is Ophelia Modlin." The white woman looked about 40 years old, with brown hair in a neat single ponytail. She looked very military when she walked and stood. After Roan finished introducing her, she nodded to everyone and said, "You can just call me Ophelia." "Hello." The agent simply greeted Ophelia, and Mona then looked at the folder in Roan's hand and asked, "What is the case this time?" Roan's eyelids twitched, and did not answer immediately, but turned his eyes to Ophelia next to him. Ophelia took a deep breath, and said in a deep voice, "A nuclear warhead has been lost, and our goal is to find it back." As Ophelia finished speaking, the entire office area instantly became extremely quiet, and even the breathing of several people stopped. Winslow and Chanel both stared with wide eyes. Mona and Michelle were shocked and opened their mouths unconsciously, and Lassie, who was a little sleepy, was directly awakened and asked in astonishment, nuclear bomb? Are you sure? Lassie stuttered a little when she spoke, and was really shocked by the news. It's not a whole nuclear bomb, just a nuclear warhead. Ophelia shook her head, distributed the information in the folder to everyone, and introduced, 31 hours ago, the NSA, National Security Agency, accidentally learned that a member of a certain organization dug up an air-to-air missile from the Cold War in a certain area of New Mexico during its daily monitoring. The military database records show that the missile was equipped with a nuclear warhead at the front. But when the NSA and other relevant departments arrived there, they only found most of the wreckage of the excavated air-to-air missile, and the nuclear warhead part was missing. The office area became even quieter. During the Cold War, the federal military held many exercises of various modes, and sometimes actually let aircraft carry nuclear bombs for simulation. But accidents always happen, and planes flying in the sky are no exception. In order to prevent nuclear bombs from being detonated by plane crashes, the military always requires pilots to drop nuclear bombs from the plane first. Because there is no detonator, the nuclear bomb will not explode when it lands. In the eyes of the military, this method is less dangerous. The planes of that period did not have accurate positioning devices, and it was difficult to tell where the nuclear bomb fell after leaving the plane. The military could only send people to that area for large-scale screening and searching. Some were successfully found and recovered, and naturally some were not found and directly lost. There were 6 such nuclear bomb loss incidents acknowledged by the federal government alone, and who knows how many were not acknowledged. At least the federal government has never acknowledged the air-to-air missile nuclear warhead incident this time. If the missile wreckage had not been dug out, this matter would probably have been hidden forever. Luo An rubbed his temple helplessly. When he heard about this from Verines, he was also very shocked. He knew that the federal government was often unreliable, but it was really beyond imagination to be so unreliable. So, the current situation is that a nuclear warhead is lost, and no one knows who stole it. After a long silence, Chinia swallowed and asked, "We have to get the nuclear warhead back, right?" "No, we just need to find its trace and find out who has it. As for the rest, there are departments specializing in handling nuclear bombs." Luo An shook his head. Although he had a system, nuclear bombs were not something that the system could handle. If the person sent by Verines and the military had not made it clear that their FBI was only responsible for finding people, and other departments were responsible for handling nuclear bombs, Luo An would never take on this case. Once the Geiger sounded, parents raised you in vain. This sentence is often exaggerated, but when you really encounter a nuclear bomb, most people's first reaction is definitely to turn around and run. After hearing Roan's words, Winslow, Michelle, and Lassie breathed a sigh of relief. Chanel noticed something and asked, "What about radiation?" "We all know that radiation is something that will infect us once we come into contact with it, and we can't escape it at all." Ophelia handed another document to everyone and explained, "The people who dug out the air-to-air missiles have been professionally tested by the relevant departments. There are no traces of radiation on them, which means that the nuclear warhead is well preserved, and there is no sign of radiation leakage." In addition, the military database also shows that the protection design of the nuclear warhead is very comprehensive and there will be no radiation leakage. After asking some simple questions, the agents of the special investigation team relaxed a little. Mona sat back at her workstation, turned on the computer and asked, "Are there any suspects?" "Of course." Ophelia took out a piece of paper and handed it to Mona and replied, "We suspect that the guy who stole the nuclear warhead is from the Nuclear Bomb Club." Chapter 658 3 Suspects. Sunday, 5:30 p.m. Special Investigation Team Office. The Nuclear Bomb Club stole the nuclear bomb. This is really in the office area. Hearing Ophelia's words, Lassie raised her eyebrows and complained, "It's really a professional match." Winslow next to her was a little confused. "What is this nuclear bomb club for?" Watching Mona quickly investigate the information, Ophelia explained without looking back, "As the name suggests, it is to find nuclear bombs. In the eyes of ordinary people, nuclear bombs are absolutely extremely terrifying items, and they just want to stay away from them. But for those rich people, nuclear bombs are the most valuable works of art in the world. After all, it is a nuclear bomb. No matter how rich you are, you can't buy it in your private name. As mentioned earlier, the loss of nuclear bombs and nuclear warheads has occurred many times in the Federation. These lost nuclear bombs naturally attracted a group of people who wanted to find them. In addition to the treasure hunting teams funded by the rich, there are also many lone wolf adventurers. In order to exchange useful information, these people set up a nuclear bomb club. They even created a festival for these treasure hunters, called the Nuclear Bomb Chasing Festival. After hearing Ophelia's explanation, Winslow and Cheney, who didn't know much about these things, suddenly widened their eyes in astonishment. Roan also rubbed his temple helplessly. He knew that the federal land was vast and there were many talents, but he never expected that the species diversity was so outrageous. Everyone, there is information. At this moment, Mona suddenly stopped typing on the keyboard and said loudly, "The people in the Nuclear Bomb Club are also discussing the situation of the nuclear warhead." As a group of guys who specialize in chasing nuclear bombs, they got the news not long after the air-to-air missile in New Mexico was dug out of the ground, and then rushed there like crazy. Because of the distance problem, some people quickly arrived at the area, while others were still on the way to drive. After they learned about the loss of the nuclear warhead, they quickly discussed the guy they suspected. The guys in this club mainly suspect 3 people. Mona brought up the chat records and photos of the 3 people on the computer screen and explained. The first one is called Albuquerque, 56 years old this year. He started his career by buying and selling scrap warehouses and flipping the items inside. Later, he changed his career and started treasure hunting. He has been in this industry for more than 30 years. The second guy is called Mattia, 31 years old this year. He is also a treasure hunter. He has been in this industry for 5 or 6 years and is a well-known rising star. In the computer photo, the elderly white man on the left is wearing tattered clothes and old equipment. He even mainly rubs by hand. He is extremely hardcore. The younger white man in the middle is wearing a beautiful windbreaker and carrying a lot of high-tech equipment. He looks like a model. The style difference between the two is quite large. Luo An glanced at the two and then retracted his gaze. He pointed to the photo of the third white man on the far right and asked, "Who is this guy?" Compared with the previous 2 people with different styles, the third white man's dress is more conspicuous. He wore a military helmet, infrared glasses, a camouflage uniform, a thick bulletproof vest, a rifle in his hand, and a pistol, a dagger, and a grenade on his waist. With this outfit, most people would not doubt that he was a mercenary. This guy's name is Wilfredo. He's 42 years old. Looking at the photo of the third person, Mona's eyes flickered with contempt and introduced, "He is a mercenary. He has been to Africa, America, the Middle East and other places. He has been in the mercenary business for more than 10 years, and treasure hunting is just his part-time job." It's not accurate to say that he is a part-time job. This guy often collects cultural relics and resells them after killing people on the battlefield. He sells those cultural relics to whoever bids the highest and doesn't care about their historical value at all. Because of this, the treasure hunting community has always regarded Wilfredo as a cancer in the industry because he is unreasonable and only cares about firepower. They are all talented. Winslow grinned, Lassie nodded in agreement, and Roan crossed his arms over his chest and asked, "Can you tell me why the 3 of them are suspected?" Mona nodded and explained, "Because these 3 people are closest to New Mexico. Albuquerque, 56. His hometown is in Arizona, next to New Mexico, not far from where the air-to-air missile was discovered. 31-year-old Maceo was the earliest person to get the air-to-air missile related information, and the earliest person to go to New Mexico. Asked, "Can you find the traces of these 3 people now?" "Sorry, I can't find it." Mona shook her head and said with both hands, "People engaged in the treasure hunting industry are very cautious. In order to prevent hacking, Albec and Maceo rarely reveal their traces, and it is difficult to position the phone." At that time, he was actively eating others. But because of this, he had a lot of enemies. In addition, the main business was a mercenary. The anti-reconnaissance ability was very strong. As long as he didn't want, we wanted to find him a lot of effort. The whole earth will turn its eyes to the Federation. It is worthy of being the beacon of the world. It grows mushrooms for itself. No wonder it is so bright. Mona took a deep breath and nodded vigorously. I will try my best. Thank you for your hard work. Roan patted Mona on the shoulder gently, then turned to look at the others and ordered, everyone, our next priority is to find the traces of these 3 people. Mona will be in charge of the headquarters and will be responsible for coordinating information to contact us and provide us with clues. Winslow, Michelle, you two will form a team and go to find 56-year-old Albuquerque. Chinal, Lassie, you two will be responsible for finding Mattia. I will work with Ophelia to find the mercenary Wilfredo. Be careful during the operation. After all, this is a nuclear warhead. If you encounter something wrong or special, save yourself and your teammates as the top priority. Do you understand? Understood. No problem. After a few simple arrangements, everyone began to pack their equipment and prepare to set off overnight. Everyone was equipped with 2 Geiger counters, one for use and one for backup. It is not an exaggeration to say that nuclear warheads are the most terrifying things in the world. In addition, once they are exposed to nuclear radiation, the consequences will be disastrous, so no matter how cautious you are, it is not excessive. After the preparations were completed, the agents of the Special Investigation Team split into 3 groups and set off overnight on special planes, heading straight for their respective targets. In the night sky, a small plane was moving in a straight line. Looking at the city with colorful lights flashing on the ground outside the window, Luo An pondered for a while, suddenly turned to look at Ophelia, and asked, Ms. Modlin, I have a question. Just call me Ophelia. Ophelia put down the documents in her hand, looked up at Luo An and smiled, and said, what's the problem? Luo An narrowed his eyes and asked, how many nuclear bombs or nuclear warheads has your military lost? Chapter 659. Investigation begins. Suspected nuclear warhead. In the small plane, Ophelia was stunned for a moment when she heard Roan's question, and then she smiled and replied, as far as I know, there are only 6. 6, and only. Roan's eyelids twitched. With emotional perception on, he could feel that the other party was 100% lying. But Ophelia's meaning was very simple. Don't ask. Even if you ask me, I don't know. Anyway, the number officially announced is 6. If it is 6, it is 6. Taking a deep breath, without further discussion on this topic, Roan continued to ask, in addition to contacting our FBI and asking us to help find the nuclear warheads, have you sent people from your military to look for them? Ophelia shook her head. No. Roan pursed his lips slightly, and emotional perception found that this sentence was also a lie. After a little hesitation, Roan decided to send a message to Winslow and the other 4, after getting off the plane, asking them to pay more attention during the operation. Roan then asked a few questions about nuclear warheads. Ophelia did not lie about these things, and she told the truth. After chatting for a while, Roan began to rest his eyes. After all, Washington DC was still some distance away from New Mexico. The next morning, Roan and Ophelia drove straight to the area where the air-to-air missiles were stolen. Halfway through the journey, Roan's cell phone suddenly rang. He pressed the answer button and heard Mona's laughter on the phone. Too good news, Roan. What's wrong? Winslow and Michelle are going very well. The sound of typing on the keyboard came from the phone, and Mona explained with a smile. This morning, Albuquerque called an old friend of his, and the signal was received by the NSA, National Security Agency, and his specific location was successfully located. Winslow and Michelle are not far from that area. I have sent them the specific coordinates, and they are heading there. But, tell them to remember to contact the local SWAT team and be careful. Roan nodded with satisfaction, and then asked, you just said there are 2 good news. What is the second one? The second one is related to you. Mona explained quickly. I checked Wilfredo's consumption records through the bank statement. The results show that 1 hour and 27 minutes ago, he bought some food for long-term storage and hundreds of 5.56 bullets in the city called Carrizozo. Only bullets. Roan frowned slightly. No guns? No. Mona on the other end of the phone carefully checked the information in the computer for a moment and said, "The records show that Wilfredo's usual firearm is the R-15 rifle. I suspect he may have a rifle, or he bought a rifle from an underground channel, and now he just lacks bullets." Got it. After a brief chat, Roan took the initiative to hang up the phone, turned the car around, and started to head to Carrizozo. At noon, Roan and Ophelia arrived in the southern part of Carrizozo and found the store where Wilfredo bought food. Seeing the photos Luo An showed, the girl in charge of the checkout nodded and said while chewing gum, "Yes, he came to our shop to buy something this morning." Luo An asked, "What did he buy? Do you remember?" "Chocolate, biscuits, mineral water, candy." The girl chewing bubble gum briefly mentioned a few kinds of food, and finally suddenly clapped her hands, pointed to the shelf in the distance, and laughed. "By the way, that guy also bought 20 packs of MRE rations that even dogs wouldn't eat." X2 MRE rations are one of the most notorious rations in the Federation. The specific content is not easy to describe. When a certain universe country in the east was hit by a disaster in the last century, there was an extreme shortage of food, so the Federation sent a large number of MRE rations. As a result, these rations were taken by the universe country to feed pigs and dogs. Humans didn't eat them at all. The local soldiers of the Federation also felt a headache when they saw MRE. Because of this, the girl was deeply impressed by Wilfredo and once guessed that Wilfredo was planning to harm others. Wilfredo and Roan looked at each other, and they also didn't understand why Wilfredo bought MREs, but it was not important now. Roan asked, "Did you see which direction this person went after leaving the mall?" "Go to the back to find the manager." The girl chewed gum and waved her hand casually, indicating that there was a hidden surveillance camera at the upper right corner of the mall gate, which was mainly used to prevent some stowaways who bought MREs for 0 yuan. The surveillance video was the responsibility of the mall manager. After finding the manager and explaining their identities and purpose, Roan and the others quickly got the surveillance video at that time. This is an old-fashioned videotape surveillance without an internet connection. In the car outside the mall, Luo An looked at the information recorded in the notebook and said to Mona on the other end of the phone, "Help me find a black SUV with a license plate number of, and find out which direction it is going. It's a small matter, simple." Mona smiled easily, and the sound of fierce keyboard typing rang out. Soon she found the trace of the car. The other party is speeding on Highway 134, but his destination is still unclear. Luo An immediately started the car and rushed into the traffic, saying while speeding, "Send the information of the SUV to the police near that highway and ask them to pay attention to surveillance." "No problem." Mona agreed without hesitation. Luo An was about to hang up the phone when he heard it. At this moment, Mona suddenly shouted, "Wait a minute. Luo An. What's wrong?" "Something's wrong. There's something wrong with the backseat of that SUV." Mona's voice on the other end of the phone suddenly became very anxious, and she explained very quickly, "I checked the video of the SUV entering the highway intersection, and the person inside is indeed Wilfredo. Through the front window, you can see a cylindrical object covered with cloth on the back seat of the SUV. In addition, the speed of the SUV is also problematic. It doesn't look like a car driven by one person, but more like a car pulled by one person." Mona's words were a bit confusing, but Roan understood what she meant. That is, in addition to Wilfredo, there might be an object weighing about one person in the SUV. Roan's face sank slightly, and he turned to look at Ophelia and asked in a serious tone, "How much does the lost nuclear warhead weigh?" Ophelia quickly replied, "About 180 pounds. After the little boy successfully ended the war, the Federation had been frantically advancing on the road of miniaturization of nuclear weapons during the Cold War. After hard work, their tactical nuclear warheads can not only be installed on various tactical missiles, but their size can even be installed on the 6-inch howitzers equipped by both sides, and the weight is even only 70 pounds. That is, more than 60 kilograms. 180 pounds. That's a little over 160 kilograms, about the same as a person's weight." Luo An narrowed his eyes, quickly converted the units, and then ordered with a serious face, "Mona, immediately contact the law enforcement agency ahead on Highway 134. explain the situation, and ask them to send someone to stop Wilfredo from moving forward. In addition, call the experts from the relevant departments and ask them to be prepared to deal with the nuclear bomb. Understood. Mona on the other end of the phone broke out in a cold sweat and quickly agreed. Before hanging up the phone, she whispered quickly, "Luo An, be careful." "Don't worry." Luo An smiled, then hung up the phone and stepped on the accelerator to the bottom. The speed of the car increased again and began to move rapidly towards the target direction. Chapter 660, The Case of Missing Nuclear Warhead, starting from Chapter 657. New Mexico, 1 p.m., Highway 134. A black SUV was moving straight on the road. At a certain intersection far in front of it, dozens of law enforcement vehicles quickly arrived here, and a group of law enforcement officers quickly made various interception measures. After receiving Mona's notice, the major law enforcement departments in the city called Encino, north of Carrizozo City, instantly exploded. The mayor and other high-level officials in Encino City did not care about the nuclear bomb explosion. Even if a lot of people died, they would not panic. But the nuclear bomb had to explode in their own city, which was unbearable, because their respective families were all in this city, and this city was their base, and radiation did not discriminate between rich and poor, gender, and skin color. So these people burst out with efficiency that had never been seen in decades. From receiving the news, to integrating the law enforcement teams of various departments, to dispatching personnel, the whole process did not even take more than 8 minutes. Not only that, the mayor of Encino and other high-level officials got more than a dozen helicopters in 3 minutes, and were ready to escape in case of an incident, and to make a strategic shift. Mona. Speechless and wanting to curse, Mona told Roan about these things. Roan, who was driving, was not surprised at all. He did not discuss this matter much, but asked, "How far is the distance between me and Wilfredo?" Mona tapped the keyboard a few times, calculated the speed of Wilfredo's SUV, and then located Roan's car, and quickly answered, "There are still about 15 minutes of driving." "That means there are still about 10 minutes. Roan nodded in understanding, then turned his eyes to Ophelia in the passenger seat, and said in a light voice, "Fasten your seat belts. Hold on to the handrails. I'm going to speed up." Ophelia, who was sweating on her forehead, suddenly widened her eyes when she heard Roan's words. "What?" At this time, Ophelia not only fastened her seatbelt tightly, but also held the black handle at the top of the car door tightly with both hands. Looking at the scenery outside the window, that was rapidly receding, she didn't know how many breaths of cold air she had taken. Having worked in the army for many years, Ophelia had seen and sat in many cars driven by crazy people. But it was the first time she had seen an SUV driving so fast and constantly overtaking left and right. Ophelia thought this was already Roan's limit, but she didn't expect him to say he wanted to speed up. Exclamation mark. Ophelia stretched her neck to look at the car's dial, which had already reached nearly 170 km/h, and said in disbelief, "Are you kidding me?" Seeing that Ophelia had taken protective measures, Roan turned back and straightened his back, grinning at the car in front of him. "The dial is not at the bottom yet. You can increase the speed." As soon as he finished speaking, he clutched the gear, stepped on the accelerator, and overtook in one go. In the astonished eyes of passers-by and car owners, and the horrified eyes of Ophelia, the SUV let out a roar, and then rushed out like a black lightning. At the same time, a certain off-road vehicle in the distance ahead was moving forward at a constant speed. In the driver's seat, a white man with short brown hair, prominent cheekbones, deep eye sockets, but very sharp eyes, was driving and talking on the phone. "How are you doing? Everything is going well." A man's laughter came from the phone, and Wilfredo nodded with satisfaction. The other party exchanged a few simple pleasantries and asked back, "Well, how are you doing?" The loss of the nuclear warhead has caused a big stir. Everyone in the circle knows about it. Many people are rushing to New Mexico. "It doesn't matter." Wilfredo smiled disdainfully. "Those guys are trash. It's useless for me to come. As long as..." He stopped halfway through his words, and the other end of the phone was a little confused. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. Let's talk later." Wilfredo said a simple sentence, and immediately hung up the phone, then looked at the intersection in the distance with a frown. He wanted to say that, as long as he didn't meet more than 10 federal law enforcement officers, he would not panic at all, and he was absolutely sure that he could leave easily. Unexpectedly, a checkpoint was suddenly set up at the intersection in the distance ahead, and a group of law enforcement officers with live ammunition appeared. The number of people seen sporadically was more than 30. Although Wilfredo was confident, he knew his own strength better, and he had no intention of fighting 30 or even more. Seeing that the SUV was still a long way from the intersection, Wilfredo took a deep breath, turned the steering wheel without hesitation, drove the SUV back into the opposite lane, and then drove back. Several passers-by and car owners in the opposite lane were startled by the SUV that suddenly turned around and inserted itself. After reacting, they all cursed. Several law enforcement officers who set up checkpoints in the distance also found this suspicious SUV. After confirming that it was a target vehicle through the license plate number, their eyes lit up instantly and shouted loudly, "Found the target, let's chase it quickly." Bang! Before the young law enforcement officer finished speaking, the older law enforcement officer next to him hit him on the back of the head fiercely, and then ordered loudly, "Spot the target vehicle, start chasing, but don't get close." Understood. Dozens of law enforcement officers immediately ran into the car slowly, ready to chase the SUV. The older law enforcement officer looked at the young man who was hit on the head with a little disdain. It was obvious that he was still too young and needed exercise. Beep beep. Soon, a rare spectacle appeared on the opposite lane, and SUV was speeding at a constant speed in front, followed by dozens of law enforcement vehicles with flashing red and blue lights. The distance between the two sides was not far or close, but it remained unchanged, just hanging far away. A bunch of trash. Looking at the law enforcement vehicles in the distance behind him who did not dare to approach through the rearview mirror, Wilfredo grinned with disdain. He understood what those people were thinking, but he did not dare to get close to the nuclear bomb, and did not dare to anger Wilfredo, fearing that he would go to extremes and detonate the nuclear bomb. But he had to follow the orders of the superiors. In this case, the best option is to use force, to drive Wilfredo away without firing a gun. After all, the Federation is a democratic country, and each city has its own manager. As long as the nuclear bomb does not explode in their own city, it doesn't matter which other city it explodes in. It's someone else's business anyway. Wait a minute. After figuring out what those law enforcement officers were thinking, Wilfredo suddenly realized that they seemed to be afraid to approach him as well. Thinking about the destination he wanted to go to, if he left this road and took a detour from a distance, he would have to walk a long way. Wilfredo's eyes moved slightly, and he stepped on the brakes suddenly. When the SUV stopped, the cars of the law enforcement departments behind him were obviously stunned for a moment, and then they all stopped. Putting the SUV in reverse gear, Wilfredo carefully observed the rearview mirror and began to drive the SUV back a little bit. A few seconds later, the cars of the law enforcement departments behind him suddenly started, but they did not chase him forward, but retreated together. Ha 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 ha. Looking at the law enforcement vehicles that were gradually retreating with him, Wilfredo immediately raised his head and laughed, his eyes full of contempt for those people. TSK. After all, the reversing speed is not fast, and the vision is not convenient. After confirming that his guess is correct, Wilfredo immediately turned the car around and started to drive in the opposite lane, pressing the car of the law enforcement officers forward. "It's me, Will." Taking out his mobile phone and calling again, Wilfredo laughed. "It's okay, I just want to tell you that I may be ahead of time." Bang! Before Wilfredo finished speaking, a muffled sound came from the back of the SUV, and a car hit the SUV's butt. Under the huge inertia, Wilfredo suddenly rushed forward uncontrollably, and the mobile phone was not held firmly, and fell to the front windshield. "Fouquet, can't you drive?" Wilfredo, whose head almost hit the steering wheel, cursed, but his face suddenly changed after a few curses. He is now driving in the opposite lane, and a car hits him and rear-ends him, so the other party is also driving in the opposite lane! Exclamation mark. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 661 Remote Control Nuclear Bomb, Arrest, Accident. Wilfredo, whose main job is to be a mercenary, is not a person who likes to follow the rules. In other words, he only likes to follow the law of the jungle and the rules that are beneficial to him. Wilfredo didn't care about the trivial matter of driving against the road, but he couldn't tolerate others driving against the road, and they were not good at driving and hit him. Damn it. Wilfredo cursed, and then suddenly realized that something was wrong. Now there was no one else on this road except him, and those law enforcement officers. Everyone stayed away, and didn't dare to get close. In this case, there are only two types of people who can hit his SUV. Either they simply have poor skills and no awareness of traffic rules, and they accidentally hit the SUV by driving against the lane, or the other party deliberately drove against the lane and deliberately hit his SUV. All kinds of thoughts flashed through Wilfredo's mind in an instant. He reacted and immediately raised his hand to grab the AR-15 rifle on the co-pilot, and at the same time, looked up at the rear view mirror to check the situation. Bang! Crash. At this moment, the glass on the main driver's door was suddenly smashed, and a hand suddenly reached in and grabbed the collar in front of Wilfredo's neck. Wilfredo's pupils shrank, and before he could react, a huge force came, and he was directly pulled out of the car window by the other party. Bang! Throwing Wilfredo to the ground with force, kicking the AR-15 that was pulled out by the other party far away. Roan then kicked him in the chest. When Wilfredo started to reverse just now, Roan drove the SUV to this area. Seeing the group of law enforcement officers in Encino City being pushed back by Wilfredo, the pale Ophelia immediately cursed loudly. Roan didn't care, and took this opportunity to immediately turn the steering wheel, drive the SUV into the opposite lane, and crashed directly into the SUV. When Mona checked the surveillance before, she not only found a cylindrical object in the backseat of the SUV, but also found traces of ropes and horizontal bars under the cover. She concluded that Wilfredo had reinforced the things in the back of the car. Roan agreed with Mona's inference. Wilfredo was a mercenary after all. If he didn't have a cautious behavior habit, he wouldn't be alive today. For a nuclear warhead, such a terrifying thing was placed in the back seat. Out of caution, Wilfredo would definitely reinforce and tie it up many times to prevent it from falling from the back seat. It was based on this inference and the emotional perception in his mind that there was no danger ahead that Roan finally made the decision to hit the other party and force him to stop. %#*. Cursing in an unknown language, Wilfredo quickly rolled sideways to avoid Roan's heavy kick. Standing up with a carb, Wilfredo put his left hand in his pocket and took out a dagger with his right hand to stab Roan. Swish! The dagger scraped through the air with a sharp sound. Roan leaned back to avoid it easily. Wilfredo took another step forward to stab. Roan grinned and suddenly pulled out a Glock pistol from behind. Don't move. Wilfredo's movement suddenly froze and his face stiffened. Roan stared at Wilfredo without turning his head back. He shouted loudly, "What's the situation?" At the SUV behind the two of them, Ophelia opened the door of the back seat and lifted the cover on the back seat. A dark grey cylindrical object with an elliptical bottom and a pointed top suddenly appeared in front of her. That's it. Ophelia's eyes lit up instantly, and she answered loudly, "We found the nuclear warhead." Good. Roan had been using emotional perception all the time, and he didn't sense any danger, and the Geiger counter on his back didn't make any sound. He breathed a sigh of relief, and then smiled and said, "Hello, Mr. Wilfredo, I'm the FBI. Congratulations, you're arrested for stealing nuclear warheads." While Roan was speaking, seeing Wilfredo being dragged out of the cars of the law enforcement agencies in the distance were no longer afraid, and they quickly rushed up and surrounded Wilfredo in the crowd with their guns raised. "Don't move. Put your hands up. Get down. Get down quickly." "No, Mr. FBI, I caught you." Facing so many guns, Wilfredo was not panicked at all. He ignored the people from the Encino City Law Enforcement Department, but grinned and opened his left hand. There was a black box with a few buttons, which was smaller than a mobile phone. Wilfredo smiled and said, "I put some small things in the nuclear warhead. This is its remote control. I suggest you let me go immediately, or you can bet on whether this remote control is real or fake. The bet is simple. If the nuclear warhead explodes, we will all die, and the area will be contaminated by radiation for dozens of miles. XN seeing the small black box in Wilfredo's hand and hearing what Wilfredo said, the people in the law enforcement department of Encino City were instantly shocked. The scene was quiet, and the faces of several leaders turned green. Ophelia, who was next to the off-road vehicle, also breathed rapidly. She only knew some information and appearance of the nuclear warhead, but she didn't know how to disassemble the nuclear warhead, and she couldn't be sure whether what Wilfredo said was true or false. Seeing that everyone else was beginning to become emotionally unstable and even a little panicked, while the FBI in front of him was still calm and expressionless, Wilfredo laughed and continued, "I'll give you 5 minutes. You can find an expert to check the situation. I'm leaving here in 5 minutes. Is there a problem? In addition, law enforcement officers, I'm just passing by on this road. I don't plan to go into the city. You can rest assured." Hearing Wilfredo's last words, the eyes of several leaders of the group of law enforcement officers lit up instantly. They looked at each other and quickly saw each other's thoughts. One of the middle-aged white men with a big belly nodded slightly, slowly moved to Luo An's side, and whispered, "Mr. FBI, I think." Bang, 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 bang. As soon as the big-bellied white man started to speak, several gunshots suddenly rang out. Wilfredo was first shot in the left wrist and the black box fell to the ground, and then his legs and shoulders were shot, and his body fell backwards to the ground. The sudden gunshot startled everyone. When the gunshot stopped, everyone quickly moved their guns to aim at the person who fired the gun, which was Roan. Whoosh! After blowing the remaining smoke from the muzzle, Roan put away the gun and explained calmly, "He is lying. The small box is not a remote control." Because he had been using emotional perception, Roan realized that the other party was lying from the first sentence Wilfredo said. The purpose was not difficult to guess, that is, to scare these people to let him go. Roan walked to Wilfredo, squatted down and picked up the small box, and laughed. "Divide and win over." The last few words are a good method. The severe pain from the muzzle and the annoyance of the plan being exposed made Wilfredo's eyes red and his mouth spit out fragrance. He greeted Roan from all angles. Roan took out handcuffs to control him and said calmly, "Save your energy, scold him when you get to the hospital, don't get excited and bleed to death on the way." Wilfredo became even more angry, but immediately stopped greeting. Roan sneered. This was another reason why he judged that the black box was a lie. Although Wilfredo was a mercenary and killed people on the battlefield, he was actually afraid of death. After all, he could enjoy beautiful women and delicious food only when he was alive, so he would never gamble with his life. Roan simply dealt with the law enforcement officers in Encino City. He was too lazy to talk nonsense with them and asked them to quickly call relevant experts to deal with the nuclear warhead. After all, no one at the scene knew how to do this kind of work. Not long after, the experts arrived at the scene and started working. After waiting for a while, Roan's cell phone suddenly rang. "It's me, Mona." Mona on the other end of the phone said hurriedly, "Chanel and Lassie have lost contact." Roan's eyes fixed, and before he could speak, Ophelia suddenly walked over quickly and said in a low voice, "Roan, something is wrong. There is a problem with this nuclear warhead." Chapter 662 True and False Nuclear Warhead. There's a problem with the nuclear warhead. Ophelia's expression was a little anxious. Roan waved his hand to interrupt her, holding the phone, and asked in a serious tone, "Mona, what exactly happened?" Mona spoke quickly and quickly explained what happened. Mona's task was to stay at the headquarters, responsible for investigating information, handling surveillance, and coordinating all parties. Half an hour ago, Roan's operation was completed, and the nuclear warhead was successfully found. After learning about it, Mona immediately sent the news to Winslow, Michelle, and Chenia, Lass's 2 teams. Since the nuclear warhead has been found, the missions of the 2 teams are naturally terminated, and the 4 people began to pack up and prepare to return. 5 minutes ago, Lassie called me out of the blue and asked me to help her retrieve the surveillance footage of a certain area during a certain period of time. Mona added in a serious tone, "I helped check it, and a few minutes later I found that the surveillance footage had been cleared by someone unknown and could not be found at all. I picked up the phone and wanted to tell Lassie about this and ask her to be careful, but the call was not connected at this time. Luo An narrowed his eyes slightly. Did Lassie tell you why she wanted you to investigate that surveillance footage? She did. Mona quickly replied. Lassie said that when she and Chanel were preparing to return, they accidentally discovered traces of Mattia being kidnapped, so they wanted to investigate the specific circumstances. Luo An hesitated for a moment and asked, what about Chanel? Did she leave any clues? I can locate her phone, Mona said in a deep voice. The positioning shows that Chanel's phone has not moved. She should have hidden or thrown her phone away as soon as she found out that something was wrong. Luo An did not hesitate to say, let Winslow and Michelle rush to the location of the positioning immediately, and I will go to that area right away. Before the convergence, let Winslow and Michelle be careful to preserve himself as the best choice. Okay. Mona agreed, and the phone was hung up. This is simply a fake nuclear warhead. It is not equipped with items such as nuclear pills, detonating devices, etc., all of which are high-weight garbage such as iron blocks and sand. Luo An's expression was calm. His expression on his face changed without any expression. Afeni said anxiously, the leader of the Luo An, we need to hurry to try the real nuclear warhead. There is only this. Don't worry, Ophelia. Luo An waved his hands to interrupt Afeni. Ophelia shouted more eagerly, how could it not be in a hurry? I told you, don't worry. Roan stood up suddenly, looked down at Ophelia, and said expressionlessly, don't make me repeat it again, okay? Looking at Roan with a cold light in his eyes, Ophelia, who was originally very excited, calmed down instantly, swallowed silently, and asked, Team Leader Roan, do you have a plan? Before that, you need to do me a favor first. Roan took out the Glock 18 from his waist slowly and said in a calm voice, Agents Chenia and Lacey from my investigation team lost contact 5 minutes ago. I need you to call your military and let them go. Just now Mona mentioned on the phone that Lacey and the others found out about the kidnapping of Mattia and asked her to help investigate the surveillance. Thinking of the previous time when Ophelia said that the military did not send anyone out to look for nuclear warheads, this sentence was a lie. Roan immediately inferred that the people who kidnapped Chenia and Lacey might be from the military. Watching Luo An shaking the pistol, Ophelia's eyelids twitched. Then she took a deep breath and said in a concentrated voice, I'm sorry, Captain Luo An. I said before that our military really didn't send anyone out to look for nuclear warheads. In addition, Captain Luo An, you don't have to scare me with a pistol. I know your shooting is very accurate, but you have to think about the consequences of shooting. I'm a military man, and the impact of your 2 men shooting me to death. Luo An grinned and showed a smile. Are you sure your military didn't send anyone out to look for nuclear warheads? I'm sure. Okay. Seeing that the other party still didn't tell the truth, refused himself, and didn't believe that he dared to shoot, Luo An's smile on his face became more sunny, and he asked back, Ms. Ophelia, do you know why I assigned you to my group for this operation instead of letting you be in a group with others? Ophelia was stunned for a moment, and before she could answer, Luo An suddenly raised his pistol and smashed it at her. Bang, with a muffled sound. Ophelia's eyes rolled back, and she fell to the ground instantly. Roan took out handcuffs and handcuffed Ophelia's hands and feet. Then he moved his hands and legs to bend backwards, took out the third handcuff, and handcuffed the 2 handcuffs on his hands and feet together again. He took out a bottle of sleeping potion and drank it, and stuffed Ophelia, who was bent in a bow shape, into the trunk of the SUV. Roan found a piece of rag and stuffed it into her mouth, and finally closed the trunk door with force. Then Roan took out his mobile phone and called Verines, briefly explaining the situation. After confirming that Verines had started to contact the military, Roan hung up the phone, started the SUV, and rushed towards Encino. On the way, Roan intercepted the ambulance that was transporting Wilfredo to the hospital. After driving away the doctors and nurses, Roan sat next to Wilfredo and said in a low voice, your nuclear warhead is fake. Where is the real one? What? Upon hearing the news, Wilfredo's eyes widened instantly, his face full of shock. Are you lying to me? Roan didn't say anything, just looked at him quietly. Seeing this, Wilfredo gradually fell silent. After thinking for a few seconds, He suddenly became angry and shouted, "Mito Jacqui, you bastard." Roan nodded in understanding. "In other words, you got this nuclear warhead from Mattia." "That's right." Seeing that the wound on his body was bleeding more and more, Wilfredo quickly stopped cursing and calmed down, explaining, "I stole it from that bastard." Mattia was the first person to know that an air-to-air missile was dug out of the ground with a nuclear warhead inside, and he was also the first person to rush to the scene. When Wilfredo arrived there in a helicopter, he happened to see Mattia driving away. Wilfredo, who was used to being unreasonable and focusing on firepower, immediately decided to snatch it. After a gunfight, the helicopter's fuel tank was leaked and could not take off, and Mattia was forced to abandon the off-road vehicle and the nuclear warhead and run away alone. Wilfredo originally planned to kill and silence him, but Mattia ran too fast, and he couldn't catch up. In addition, Mattia also called for help. Wilfredo finally had to give up the pursuit and drove the off-road vehicle carrying the nuclear warhead away quickly. Luo An nodded silently and thought clearly about what happened. After arriving at the scene first, Mattia knew that this matter was too important and he couldn't eat it, so he decided to find someone to take the blame. First, make a fake nuclear warhead, hide the real nuclear warhead, and let yourself run away with the fake nuclear warhead. On the way, you will inevitably be chased and intercepted by people. At that time, pretend to be defeated and forced to run away, so that everyone knows that the nuclear warhead has been taken away. If the news spreads, Mattia will indeed be laughed at, but he can quietly hide his figure, leave with the real nuclear warhead, and make a fortune in silence. The routine is not new, but as long as the disguise is sufficient, the possibility of being discovered in a short time is very low, because everyone will focus on the fool who takes the blame. A fool. Patting Wilfredo on the shoulder, Roan asked, "Do you have anything else to say?" "Yes." The wound caused by anger spurted blood again, and Wilfredo turned a blind eye. "I know two secret bases of Mattia, and he is likely to hide the real nuclear warhead there." Chapter 663 Poor Porn. New Mexico, 2:30 p.m. Highway 134, in an ambulance. "Do you know about Mattia's two secret bases?" Hearing the information from Wilfredo, Luo An was a little surprised. Did Mattia not find out? "How could I let him find out?" Wilfredo showed a cunning smile, saying that he had used various methods to get the specific addresses of not only Mattia, but also many other people's secret bases in this industry. He had not taken action before, because there was nothing worth his action. At the same time, these specific addresses were also Wilfredo's backup plans for himself, or even retirement plans. If he ran out of money one day, he could go to those secret bases to purchase goods. In Wilfredo's eyes, those treasure hunters were just security guards who kept treasures for him. Looking at Wilfredo with a cunning smile on his face, Luo An was very emotional. He was not impressed by Wilfredo's plan, but by the fact that over the long period of time, the people he met were smarter than each other, with various means emerging one after another, and none of them were simple-minded. Wilfredo was very angry because he was played for a fool and took the blame for the other party. He not only told Roan the specific locations of Mattia's two secret bases, but also provided a suspected location of the other party's secret base, as well as several of his own spare weapons depots, asking Roan to capture Mattia. The ambulance took Wilfredo to the hospital again. Roan turned around and drove in the direction of Chanel's mobile phone location. The place where Chanel and Lassie went before was also in New Mexico. The city was called Lovington, which was in the easternmost part of the state. At 5:30 in the afternoon, Roan drove to the city. Winslow and Michelle arrived before him and had found Chanel's mobile phone under Mona's guidance. Chanel left us clues. In the car, Winslow handed Chanel's cell phone to Roan and said with a serious face, "It's a few letters, poor." Seeing these letters, Roan's mind suddenly realized and shook his head. This was not left by Chanel, but by Lassie. Winslow was a little confused. "Why do you say that?" Holding the phone and pressing the buttons, Roan added an N after poor and said, "Because these three letters are incomplete, one is missing." Winslow took a look and frowned. "Pawn, which means hostage." As soon as Winslow finished speaking, Michelle in the back seat of the car clapped her hands and suddenly realized, "No, it's soldier. This word is the soldier in chess." "That's right. During the holiday some time ago, Lassie met a girl who liked chess, so she bought a chess set and started learning. During the lunch break of the investigation team, she also pulled Roan to play with her. Luo An knew the rules of Oriental chess, but not the rules of international chess, so he lost 3 games in a row at the beginning. After he became familiar with the rules, Luo An won 10 games in a row, so Lassie never played with him again. Winslow suddenly understood after hearing Michelle's explanation, and then frowned and said, "Lassie left this word, which means that the military took her and Chenier away." Luo An nodded. "High probability." Michelle suddenly remembered something, looked around but couldn't find anyone, and asked, "Luo An, where is the woman from the military? Where did she go?" "She was sleeping in the trunk." Luo An answered casually, without discussing it more, took out his mobile phone and called Mona. "Mona, have you found any clues?" "Not yet." Mona on the other end of the phone frowned and said, "At the time when Chenier and Lassie disappeared, all the surveillance near that area was cleared, and I can't find it at all." After a pause of a few seconds, Mona tentatively asked, "Do you want me to enter the military system?" "No need." Luo An's eyelids twitched, and he quickly interrupted Mona's thoughts. "The military is definitely a special existence in the Federation, self-contained, and even the president can't get involved. With hundreds of billions of dollars spent on military expenditures each year, whoever investigates the specific situation will be shot in the back and commit suicide. In this case, there is no need to invade the military system to investigate clues." Luo An hesitated for a moment and asked, "Mona, in the city of Lovington, in addition to the area where we are now, has the surveillance in other areas been cleared?" "Yes, such as the east side of you." After typing a few times on the keyboard, Mona quickly replied, "If you connect the clear surveillance areas into line segments, it can be determined that those people left the city of Lovington from the east side of you." "East side?" Luo An frowned slightly and waved to Winslow, saying, "Give me a map of New Mexico." "Okay." Every time they go to other states of the Federation to perform tasks, the investigation team habitually buys a few maps just in case. Winslow quickly found the map and handed it to Roan. Roan looked at the city on it and suddenly asked, "Mona, check the surveillance of the city Neravita to see if any surveillance has been erased." "Okay." Mona immediately agreed and began to investigate. Winslow asked with some confusion, "Why Neravita?" "Because this city is the only way to Mattia's first secret base." Roan briefly introduced the clues he had received from Wilfredo not long ago. Mattia's 2 secret bases are not inside a certain city, but on 2 farms. From the city of Lovington where Roan and the other 2 are now, to the 2 farms, they must pass through several cities. As long as they find out whether there are surveillance clearing events in those cities, they can infer the opponent's route and goal. Not long after, Mona's voice sounded again in the phone. "Roan, there is no disappearance of surveillance in the city of Neravita. Go on." Roan then said the names of several other cities. After waiting for a moment, Mona's somewhat excited voice suddenly rang in the phone. "Roan, I found it." Winslow and Michelle looked up instantly and were refreshed. Roan quickly asked, "Which city?" "It's Capellan City in the northernmost part of New Mexico." Roan pulled the map over again, looked at it carefully for a few seconds, grinned, and said, "That is the direction to Mattia's second secret base. It can be confirmed that the people who kidnapped Lassie and Chanel are the military. They are also looking for nuclear warheads." Winslow and Michelle were very happy to get clues about the other party's whereabouts, but there was still a question they didn't understand. Michelle wondered, why did the military kidnap Chanel, Lassie and the others? Didn't we also receive orders to find nuclear warheads? Maybe it's because we are also looking for nuclear warheads. Roan returned the map to Winslow. A cold light flashed in his eyes, and he sneered and said, "There are too many dirty things in the Federal Army. It cost $6 million to airlift 9 sheep, but in the end the sheep could not be found because they were eaten. There are countless such small things in the Federal Army. With such a large nuclear warhead, who knows who is playing games with each other behind the scenes? Mona, call and help call a helicopter." Starting the SUV, stepping on the accelerator to the bottom, the car drove onto the road, and Roan said while driving, "Let's go directly to Mattia's secret base number 2, where we will wait for Chenier and Lassie." Chapter 664, Minefield. threats, and corpses. At 10:30 p.m., in a small town about 10 kilometers north of Kit Carson City, Colorado, on the highway outside the town, more than a dozen off-road vehicles were lined up and moving forward quickly, stirring up dust all over the road. Turning an intersection, the driver of the leading off-road vehicle suddenly shrank his pupils because he found that there was a landmine openly placed on the road not far away. Swish! The driver in the leading SUV quickly stepped on the brakes to stop the vehicle, and the SUVs behind it stopped moving one after another. Soon, the co-pilot's communicator rang, and an emotionless male voice came out, "What's going on?" The driver quickly replied, "Sir, there are a lot of mines on the road ahead." The communicator paused for a moment, and then asked, "Can we go around it?" The driver in the leading SUV was about to answer when he suddenly found a man walking out of the minefield not far away, so he quickly shouted, "Sir, someone is walking out of the minefield." The man in the co-pilot seat next to the driver and the two men in the back seat of the car quickly got out of the car with their guns raised and prepared to aim. At the same time, the man in the minefield shouted, "FBI, I'm looking for your commander." The man in the minefield was Luo An. He held a golden badge in his left hand and a Glock 18 in his right hand. He had a very calm expression and said loudly, "Your commander knows why I came here. Let him come out and we'll talk." After the words fell, the air was silent. Several people in the leading off-road vehicle looked at each other and transmitted Roan's words through the communicator. Not long after, the door of an off-road vehicle in the middle of the convoy opened, and a white middle-aged man in federal military uniform, with a crew cut, tall stature, and expressionless face walked towards Roan. "Good evening, Captain." Standing in the minefield, Roan looked at the epaulets on the other's shoulders and said without nonsense, "I'm here to pick up my agent, Roan Greenwood, one of the most powerful team leaders of the FBI Washington headquarters." The expressionless middle-aged man did not respond to Roan's words, but said, "You are not panicked at all in the face of so many guns. I feel that the army is more suitable for you." At this time, the middle-aged man was full of soldiers wearing federal military uniforms, all aiming their guns at Roan. Luo An looked calm and said, "Thank you for the compliment. Let's not tell the truth. Let's talk about business first. Give the person back to me, and I will make way for you to pass." The middle-aged man narrowed his eyes slightly. "Aren't you afraid that I will order you to be shot to death?" "You can try." Luo An looked at the middle-aged man in front of him with a smile and said, "See what will happen here after you shoot me to death." The middle-aged man frowned slightly and stared at Luo An. Luo An did not show any weakness and also looked at him quietly. The air was quiet for a long time, and the middle-aged man said in a deep voice, "The two women were not injured, but they saw some secrets. In order to prevent the secrets from being leaked, they are temporarily in my custody. When this matter is over, I will naturally let them go. My agents know the rules. They will not talk nonsense, and they will not interfere with your actions." Luo An smiled and said, "If you really don't believe them, you can trust me. I have always been very tight-lipped." The middle-aged man's eyes were very sharp and oppressive, but Luo An pretended not to see it and said calmly, "In addition, I will tell you a piece of news for free. Before you, there were several cars rushing from this road to a farm in the distance. Calculating the time, it should be less than 10 minutes. The middle-aged man's face suddenly darkened. "Why didn't you stop them?" "I couldn't stop them. There was no way to stop them. I didn't have the ability, you know." Luo An spread his hands. "My men are with you. There are so many people on the other side. How can I stop them? Don't you have so many mines?" "I have a bad memory and forgot." The middle-aged man's eyebrows twitched. He looked at Luo An with a dark expression and said in a commanding tone, "The matter of nuclear warheads does not require your FBI involvement. I will return the two women to you. You take them away immediately. Keep everything you saw in your heart. Understand?" Luo An spread his hands and said nothing. The middle-aged man snorted coldly, waved his hand and said, "Let them go." "Understood." Several soldiers behind him immediately responded loudly, and then walked quickly to an off-road vehicle in the distance, and dragged two women with their hands tied, and their mouths pressed against their feet, but their clothes were clean and normal, out of the car. Watching Chinel and Lassie crawling up from the ground beside the car, Roan narrowed his eyes and looked at the middle-aged man. "It's indeed a military style. The middle-aged man ignored Roan's sarcasm and said, "The people are returned to you. Quickly get rid of the mines." He gestured to Chanel and Lassie, asking the two women to go behind the mines. After they left completely, Roan also stepped back out of the minefield and then said loudly, "Deal with it yourselves. They won't explode as long as I don't nod." As he said that, Roan led Chanel and Lassie to run quickly to the car, where Winslow had been waiting for a long time not far away. The three got in the car and sat down. Winslow immediately started the car and quickly left the area. TSK, the tape on their mouths was torn off, and Roan helped Chenier and Lassie untie the ropes on their hands. The two girls immediately cursed, "Don't eat the sour radish. These damn bugs. A bunch of garbage." The two girls cursed a lot, and after their emotions stabilized, they expressed their gratitude to Roan, and then asked, "Roan, what's the matter with those mines? I borrowed them from a kind person." Roan smiled. "Those mines also came from Wilfredo. This guy prepared a lot of arsenals around the world, and these mines were one of them. However, these mines were not actually all activated, and Roan was not that crazy. Threatening the military leaders with mines was only plan 1. If the threat failed, Roan still had plan 2 and plan 3, such as taking them hostage quickly before they reacted, threatening to release them, or letting Winslow shoot them from a distance. After confirming that Chenier and Lassie had some scars on their wrists from the ropes, there were no wounds on other parts of their bodies, and they had not been tortured by interrogation, the few people breathed a sigh of relief. After comforting for a while, Roan brought the conversation to the point and asked, "What happened?" Hearing Roan's question, Chanel and Lassie looked solemn and answered, "We found Mattia's body." Body? Winslow and Michelle were very surprised. Roan frowned slightly and continued to ask, "Have you found out who killed him?" "No." Lassie spread her hands helplessly. "Chanel and I just found Mattia's body. Before we could go up to check the situation, this group of soldiers suddenly rushed out with guns and surrounded us. The body was taken away by the group of soldiers for disposal, and we didn't see anything. The captain just now said that you saw some secrets and that's why he took you away." Michelle frowned and thought, "Is Mattia's body a secret? Is there something on him?" Chanel shook her head, rubbed her wrist and said, "I have been thinking about this for some time. I suspect that Mattia's body is not important." "What's important?" "What's important is the person who killed Mattia." Roan's eyes moved slightly, and he continued what Chanel said, then pressed the communicator and asked, "Mona, have you found out the identities of the group of people before?" Chapter 665. The military, fighting, taking the blame. Roan did lie to the captain about the mines on the road that were not all activated. However, Roan was telling the truth about a group of people going to the farm before the captain and his men arrived at the area. When Roan, Winslow and Michelle had just hidden the cars whizzed past and rushed into the distance. Fortunately, Roan reacted quickly and saw the license plate numbers of the cars and then told them to Mona. "I have checked it." Hearing Roan's question, Mona on the other end of the communicator immediately replied, "The 3 cars belong to the same security company. The owner of the security company is named Kaligia, male, white, 31 years old this year." "Security company?" Michelle frowned. "Why is there a security company involved here? It should be said that the people behind this security company want to do something." Roan shook his head and refuted Michelle's words. Among the various security companies in the Federation, more than 90% of those that can survive to the end and operate successfully have people behind them. Could it be some wealthy man? Chenier's eyes moved, and she quickly thought of something and guessed. After all, nuclear warheads are one of the most precious items in the world. It is normal for a wealthy man to want to collect them. Luo An waved his hand to interrupt the women's speculations and asked while pressing the communicator, "Mona, can you find out who is behind this security company?" "Of course." The sound of keyboard typing rang out in the communicator, and Mona replied, "The person behind this security company did not hide himself at all. His name is Sobian. He is 36 years old and is a second lieutenant in a certain army of the Federal Army. Many orders of this security company come from Sobian's connections and recommendations." Hearing the word second lieutenant, Luo An raised his eyebrows and thought of something. He turned to look at Chinia and Lassie and asked, "Do you know the name of the captain who kidnapped you?" The other party had not said his name during the communication just now, so Luo An could only call him by his military rank. "His name is Joel," Chinia answered quickly. "Joel Mock." Before she and Lassie were controlled, they took the opportunity to chat with a few ordinary soldiers when the other party was not paying attention, and asked each other's name. Luo An pressed the communicator. "Mona, I heard it." The communicator was filled with the sound of keyboard typing. After a moment, the keyboard sound stopped, and Mona's voice sounded. "These two people are related. More than 10 years ago, Sobian and Kyosili entered the federal army together, and were assigned to the same team. They had a good relationship. Kyosili was promoted very quickly, and is now a captain. Sobian's promotion speed was relatively slow. He is now only a second lieutenant, and is still working under Captain Kyosili." After listening to Mona's description, Winslow, who had been driving and not talking much, suddenly grinned. "The Federal Army is a place that attaches great importance to hierarchy. The orders of the superiors must be obeyed by the subordinates and cannot be questioned. The two used to be good friends of the same level, but now they have become superiors and subordinates. This is really..." Lassie sneered at the side and added, "I'm afraid Sobian thinks about this when he sleeps. But what do these things have to do with nuclear warheads?" Michelle was still puzzled. Even if Lieutenant Sobian is very dissatisfied with Captain Jolai now, he can complain, curse, or even go to extremes and secretly kill Jolai with a gun. But this time it's a nuclear warhead. Does Sobian intend to steal the nuclear warhead and use it to kill Jolai? Isn't this a bit of an exaggeration? Maybe he intends to retaliate against the army. Mona's voice sounded in the communicator, and she speculated. Sobian is very likely very dissatisfied with the promotion method of the federal army, so he intends to take this opportunity to steal the nuclear warhead and retaliate against society. From a rational point of view, Mona's speculation is a bit outrageous. But this is the Federation, with rich biodiversity, and there is no need for any lofty reasons to retaliate against society. The price increase of mineral water can cause explosions, so Mona's speculation is well founded and very reasonable. After a few seconds of silence, Lassie suddenly clapped her hands and said with a smile, "No matter what, the nuclear warhead issue is an internal struggle of the federal military. Captain Jolai just said that we don't need the FBI to get involved, and the outcome has nothing to do with our investigation team. So, should we go back?" Winslow frowned slightly. Michelle and Chinia looked at each other and turned their eyes to the team leader Roan. Roan pondered for a few seconds and slowly shook his head. "No, we still need to find the nuclear warhead." The smile on Lassie's face gradually disappeared. After a little thought, she looked up and asked, "Are you worried that the military may pass the buck?" Roan said coldly, "Not a possibility, but a certainty. Judging from the procedures of this matter, the people who led the search for the lost nuclear warhead were Owen, and others from the Special Investigation Team of the FBI Washington headquarters, and Ophelia sent by the military was an auxiliary and helper. Captain Jolai and his people were private activities without a written procedure, and everything was Captain Jolai's own intention. It's easy to say that the nuclear warhead was successfully found. Afterwards, it was just a matter of wrangling among the parties and dividing the interests. Once the nuclear warhead exploded, causing a large number of deaths and nuclear radiation, someone had to take the blame. Captain Jolai and others would not be in a good situation at that time, and Luo An and others would probably not get any good results, because they were the special investigation team that was looking for nuclear bombs in the open, and in the procedures. The explosion of the nuclear warhead was a failure of work, and they had to take the blame. With the protection of Verines, Mr. Clement, and FBI Director Robert, Luo An would probably just be criticized, demoted, and rest for a while, and he would rise again in the future. But the cause of the fault was not himself, so why should he be implicated and take the blame because of the mistakes of others? Luo An did not have this kind of dedication to sacrifice himself for the blame. So after these analyses, he said in a deep voice, "Everyone, we can ignore the internal struggles of the military, and how many people they died has nothing to do with us, but we must find the nuclear warhead." Then he threw the blame back. "Okay, understood." Winslow and others in the car looked solemn and nodded in unison. These people in the special investigation team would rise and fall together with Luo An. Winslow, who was driving, slowly slowed down the car, took a deep breath, and asked, should we go back the same way? Captain Jolly may have had a fight with the people from the security company now. Lassie rolled her eyes a few times, raised the corners of her mouth and suggested, we can do it like the previous operation in Bay X, waiting for the battle between the two sides to end, and then enter the scene from behind, to grab the nuclear warhead. Doing so will provoke fierce resistance from Captain Jolly and others. Chinia shook her head, thought about it, and put forward her own suggestion. How about we take advantage of their current battle, enter from behind, and quietly steal the nuclear warhead? Your method is too difficult. Lassie shook her head and refuted. Michelle ignored the argument between the two. She turned her gaze to Roan and asked, Roan, what are you going to do? Roan was silent for a long time with his chin on his hand, his eyes slightly narrowed. Is there a possibility that the real nuclear warhead is not with Jolly and others? Chapter 666 The Art of War. At 12 o'clock midnight, on a highway far away from a small town north of Kit Carson City, Colorado, and Sav slowly pulled up to the side of the road. The nuclear warhead is not with Captain Jolly and the others? Inside the car, Chinel, Lassie and others all turned their eyes to Roan, somewhat puzzled. What do you mean? Roan rested his chin on his hand and said, based on the clues we have now, we can analyze that the person who killed the treasure hunter Mattia is most likely Lieutenant Subian, and his real goal is to find the nuclear warhead. That's right. Lassie nodded repeatedly. We just haven't figured out what Subian is going to do with the nuclear warhead. We can leave this for later discussion and investigation. Roan narrowed his eyes and said, let's look at a question first. Why did Subian try to kill Mattia? Winslow and Michelle frowned slightly, and Lassie answered subconsciously, from Subian's perspective, after Mattia revealed the real address, where the nuclear warhead was hidden, he was useless, so naturally he had to be killed. Chinel, with a frown on her face, thought for a few seconds, suddenly raised her head, and clapped her hands. The real reason why Subian killed Mattia was that he didn't want Jolly and the others to know the hidden location of the nuclear warhead. Lassie turned her head. Aren't you saying the same thing as me? Mattia was killed, and Jolly and the others naturally couldn't get the location where the nuclear warhead was hidden. No, that's not the case. Chinia shook her head, turned her gaze to Roan, and said, Roan meant that Subian killed Mattia because he wanted Jolly and the others to keep an eye on him. Killing people can deepen this trust and judgment. That's right. Roan patted Chinia on the shoulder and explained to Winslow and Lassie, who were still a little confused, if Subian knew that Jolly and the others were looking for him, then after getting the real hidden location of the nuclear warhead, in order to successfully get the nuclear warhead and not be caught by Jolly and the others, the best way is to pretend a false appearance. Michelle next to him also reacted at this time and suddenly realized Subian killed Mattia, pretending that he had found the hidden location of the nuclear warhead and took people to the specific location. But in fact, this group of people is bait, just to lure Kyosili and his group of pursuers to follow. In fact, there is no nuclear warhead in this area. The real Subian has led people to another direction, where the nuclear warhead is actually located. Repairing the plank road in the open, crossing Chinkang in secret, making a feint to the east, and attacking the west. The Art of War. The Art of War, literally translated as The Art of War, actually means the art of war. The book itself comes from the east, but all major military academies in the Federation have listed it as one of the required courses. Even the cumulative sales of this book are ranked in the top 20 in the Western world, and MBA training also lists this book as an important subject for learning corporate strategy. Hearing the idiom translation that Michelle said later, Winslow's eyes lit up, and he understood what Roan meant. Lassie also quickly turned around. Mattia is dead. If Jolly wants to find the nuclear warhead and hunt down Subian, he can only follow the clues left by Subian, that is, chase them. But these clues were left deliberately by Subian. They are all illusions. That's right. Roan nodded. In addition to the rational analysis of the death of Mattia and the kidnapping of Chinia and the other two, the emotional perception in his mind is also one of the supports for this inference. When arresting the mercenary Wilfredo carrying the nuclear warhead, Roan's emotional perception in his mind never issued a fierce warning signal. The emotional perception that would be excited when encountering a grenade on weekdays did not fluctuate much when encountering a nuclear warhead today, which made Roan wonder if the emotional perception was broken. Later, Roan was relieved because the problem was not the emotional perception, but the nuclear warhead was a fake. When setting up the minefield, emotional perception began to frantically remind Roan of the danger, and also let Roan confirm from the side that there was no problem. So when leading Chinia and Lassie to evacuate just now, Roan deliberately asked Winslow to pass by the road not far from the side of the farm, and as a result, the fluctuation of emotional perception was very small. When encountering a pile of mines, emotional perception frantically reminded when encountering a nuclear warhead with a range thousands of times larger than that of a mine, and an explosion tens of thousands of times more terrifying, emotional perception fluctuated very little. Roan could only come to one conclusion in the end: there were no real nuclear warheads in that farm, and the danger determined by emotional perception was the people from the security company. After a few seconds of silence, Lassie suddenly grinned and said, "Now I can guess why Sobian is dissatisfied." Several people looked at her in confusion. Lassie chuckled and said, "Captain Jolly couldn't see through this feint to the east and attack in the west. No wonder Lieutenant Sobian was dissatisfied with him. Promotion in the Federal Army does not necessarily depend on strength." Winslow chuckled and said, "Sometimes Franklin or a minister's relative is more useful." Lassie grinned. "To real." Michelle thought for a while and said, "In fact, it is not necessarily Jolly's incompetence. If you put yourself in his perspective, you can find that he actually has no choice. Because he was a step slower, Mattia was killed, resulting in him having no clues. The best way to find Sobian is to follow the clues arranged by Sobian first, and then catch Sobian's men in the process, forcing them to ask about the real location, and finally find and arrest Sobian." Lassie blinked. "You can only follow the enemy's arrangements. Isn't this still incompetence?" Michelle opened her mouth, not knowing how to refute for a moment. Roan patted Lassie's arm gently and said in a deep voice, "Let's not discuss Captain Jolly's matter for now. Our next priority is to find the nuclear warhead." As he said that, Roan took another map and looked at it carefully for a moment. He ordered, "Winslow, you stay in this area and observe Captain Jolly and the battle in the farm from a distance. Don't get close. This is mainly to be on the safe side and to keep an eye on the movements of Captain Jolly and others. Understood?" Winslow nodded, and Roan then said to Chinia, "Michelle and Lacey, you three come with me. We are going to Texas next door. The secret base suspected to be Mattia mentioned by the mercenary Wilfredo before is located in a certain area in western Texas." "Okay." The three women nodded in agreement, and Roan then pressed the communicator and asked Mona to help them contact the helicopter and car. The group acted according to the plan. Winslow returned and left first, while Roan and the other three began to wait for the helicopter to arrive. Chanel and Lassie leaned against each other and took a nap because they were too tired. Michelle helped them make instant food. Roan stood aside, pondered for a long time, took out his mobile phone, found a number and called. The call was quickly connected, and a seductive female voice sounded from the phone. "Good evening, Team Leader Roan. Have you figured it out? It doesn't seem appropriate for a woman to say this." Roan smiled and got to the point, saying, "I want to ask you for a favor. I need to talk to your father." Chapter 667, Texas, Roan's seduction. 5:30 a.m., West Texas. This area is relatively flat. At a glance, there is no yellow color of big rocks, dust, and sand, and the green of grass and trees is very scarce. This was originally a mining area. After the minerals were mined out, it naturally became an abandoned area with no one coming and no one managing it. As for the so-called environmentalists, they only move and protest inside the city. Only a small number of them will do practical things in places where environmental protection is really needed. Today, this abandoned mining area is no longer as quiet as before. In front of the mining area, 4 black cars are parked. Several white men with rifles are laughing and chatting behind the cars. A white man with a crew cut, wearing sunglasses, a dark blue leather jacket and black jeans, sits on the front of a car in the front. He swings a pistol in his right hand, chews gum in his mouth, and always looks into the distance. Suddenly, a black SUV appears from a distance and drives straight to this place along the road in the dust. The white man frowned slightly. Only one SUV appeared, which was a bit beyond his expectation. So he pressed the communicator and asked, "High ground, is there anything else around?" The communicator soon rang, and the white man's men replied, "No, boss." "Okay." After receiving the reply from his men, the white man was slightly relieved. He waved his hand to signal the men behind him to stop laughing and stand up, and he also straightened his back. Not long after, the black SUV gradually drove to the front of the mining area and slowly stopped. Seeing this, the white man raised the corner of his mouth, coughed to clear his throat, and shouted loudly, "You." Just as he started to speak, the black SUV suddenly started, turned the vehicle around and ran away. The sudden action of the black SUV caused everyone to be stunned. The men behind who were ready to shoot were confused and didn't understand what was going on. After looking at each other, they all looked at their boss. The boss in a leather jacket was also confused and didn't understand what was going on. He even suspected that the other party was not the guy he was waiting for. Could it be a group of passers-by who drove to the wrong place? At this moment, the communicator in the hand of the man in the leather jacket suddenly rang, and a strange female voice came from it. "Report to the captain. Retreat immediately. There are no nuclear warheads here. Fouquet." Hearing this, the man in the leather jacket's face changed instantly, and he quickly stood up and jumped off the front of the car and ordered loudly, "Chase them." Understood. A group of people rushed into the car, started the car, and chased the SUV in the distance. In the SUV at the front, Chanel, who was pretending to contact Captain Jolie, put down the communicator and gave a thumbs up to Michelle, who was fiddling with the computer equipment in the back seat and invading the other party's communication channel. Then she looked at Ron, who was driving, and said with a smile, "That man is indeed Lieutenant Subian, and they have also caught up with us." Ron glanced at the rear view mirror and smiled. "It seems that my guess is correct. The nuclear warhead is indeed not here." Chanel looked at the smoke and dust behind her and nodded to Ron with admiration. More than an hour ago, Ron and the other two arrived in this area. Chanel and Lassie planned to go to the secret base to look for the nuclear bomb immediately, but were stopped by Ron. Ron did not act in a hurry, but asked Michelle to get a map first. From the course of events, the real nuclear warhead was first stolen by Mattia and hidden on the spot, and then he ran away with the fake nuclear warhead. When he met Wilfredo, who liked to talk about firepower, Mattia pretended to be defeated, and the fake nuclear warhead was snatched away. Mattia quietly returned and hid the real nuclear warhead. But somehow, this was discovered by Lieutenant Subian, who led his men to capture Mattia first. After a big memory recovery operation, Subian got the location of the real nuclear warhead. In order to successfully get the nuclear warhead, Subian sent people from the security company to lure Captain Jolie and others to chase in the wrong direction, and he quietly went to the right place. This time difference is not too long, nor is it short. Luo An made a simple calculation and thought from another perspective, and found that this time was enough for him to transfer the nuclear warhead and hide it somewhere else. As a lieutenant who can use the strategy of repairing the plank road in the open and crossing the Chinkang in secret, Subian's mentality may be unbalanced, leading to the desire to retaliate against society, but his thinking is probably fine. He can't sit there guarding the nuclear warhead and wait for Captain Jolie and others to catch him. On the contrary, he would first move the nuclear warhead out, wait for Kyosili to arrive here, and then laugh at him. Finally, he would detonate the nuclear warhead, or use the nuclear warhead to threaten the other party to agree to make his own demands. This operation might be more in line with Subian's mentality. Based on this judgment, Luo An made a plan to go to the scene, not discuss with the other party, and retreat directly to lure the other party to catch up. This way, one is not to fight with the other party in a familiar place, to prevent oneself from falling into a trap and encountering disadvantages. The second is to lead the other party into a trap designed by oneself, so as to make the other party disadvantageous. Even if this plan fails, it is okay if the other party does not follow. That means the nuclear warhead is really here, and he can call for support later and let other departments come here. to deal with the arrest. In any case, Luo An will not lose. The car turned a corner. Luo An looked at the big rock next to him, pressed the communicator, and said, "Mona, carefully investigate the cars, trains, and even helicopters passing through this area." "No problem." Mona agreed. Luo An continued to press the communicator and said, "Lassie, people have caught up with us. Get ready. Leave it to me." Not far away, behind a big rock, Lassie, who had been waiting for a long time, raised her lips. When the SUV driven by Luo An quickly passed a certain area and the 4 cars behind drove in, Lassie suddenly stood up and threw the backpack in her hand out with force. Boom. Several grenades prepared in advance in the backpack exploded with a loud bang. The sudden explosion and the splashing shrapnel scared the people in the 4 cars. The driver subconsciously turned the steering wheel to avoid it, and then entered the small minefield prepared by Luo An and others on the side of the road. Boom. 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 The mines were triggered and exploded instantly. The 2 cars at the back were blown to pieces. The 2 cars in front also stopped uncontrollably on the side of the road. Wow. With a drift, the SUV turned around and stopped at the side of the road in the distance. Chinia looked at the dust and smoke not far away, and her eyelids twitched. "I didn't expect Wilfredo's goods to be so useful." Lassie on the other end of the communicator grinned and was about to speak to express her agreement when the second car that had stopped suddenly started. It jumped forward and hit the car in front that blocked the road, opening the road, then turned around, and the front of the car scraped the side of the car in front, leaving a spark on several parts, and finally evacuated quickly into the distance. The person in that car is Serbian. Lassie, who was closest to the car, saw it most clearly and shouted to the communicator with an anxious face. He abandoned his men and ran away. As expected of a federal lieutenant, he is very skilled in selling out his teammates. Roan stepped on the accelerator to the bottom, and the SUV caught up in an instant. At this moment, Mona's voice suddenly sounded in the communicator. "Roan, I may have found the nuclear warhead." "Where is it?" "It's heading towards the capital of Texas." If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 668, Die Together, Shocking Bomb. A tall building in Washington, D.C. in the distance. Mona sat at her workstation and quickly tapped on the computer keyboard, speaking quickly. 2 hours ago, a transport train passed by not far from where you are, Luo An. When passing through that area, the train stopped running and waited for more than 20 minutes because of a malfunction. In addition to the transport train, there were no other suspicious cars or helicopters in this area. It seems that Serbian has a high probability of hiding the nuclear bomb on that transport train. In the fast-moving SUV, Chinia nodded solemnly and then asked, "But why did he send the nuclear bomb to Austin?" "Simply because there are many people there. Austin is the capital of Texas, equivalent to the provincial capital of the East. It shouldn't be like this." Michelle shook her head in the backseat of the SUV and said, "Serbian himself is from Texas, and his hometown is not far from Austin. He can't blow up his parents in his hometown, right?" At the Big Rock, Lassie was cleaning up the minefield and controlling the enemies who were knocked unconscious and injured. Hearing Michelle's words, she pressed the communicator and guessed, maybe when he was in school, Serbian was bullied in Austin City, so now he wants to use the nuclear warhead to set off a big firework for his school. Don't guess blindly. Roan, who was driving, patted Chinia's arm, asked her to sit down and fasten her seatbelt, and then press the communicator. "Mona, take out the phone number 1 gave you before, call the other end to explain the situation, and ask them to deal with the nuclear warhead as soon as possible." "No problem." Mona agreed immediately. Roan released the communicator, and without saying anything nonsense, he immediately shifted gears and stepped on the accelerator to the bottom. Boom. The SUV roared like a beast, and the speed increased again, chasing the car in front. Fouquet. Through the rearview mirror, he saw the SUV behind him speeding towards him at a speed visible to the naked eye. Sitting in the passenger seat, Sobian, wearing a leather jacket, immediately cursed and yelled at the driver, "Speed up! Speed up! The car behind is catching up. I'm speeding up." Because of the landmine that exploded before, the driver became very panicked. Hearing Sobian yelling at him, the increasingly panicked driver didn't care that the other party was his boss and yelled back, "Motherfucker! My foot is almost stepping into the gas tank." Sobian became even more angry. Waste. The driver's veins bulged when he heard this, and he turned his head with anger on his face. Then he saw the black muzzle of the gun. Bang! A shot shot the driver in the head, and Sobian opened the car door and kicked the body down to use it as an obstacle to block the SUV behind. Then he controlled the steering wheel himself and moved from the passenger seat to the driver's seat. Swish. In the SUV, Luo An quickly turned the steering wheel to avoid the body, preventing the vehicle from being overturned by the body, and then ordered, "Chanel, shoot." Understood. Chanel immediately took out her pistol, lowered the passenger window, stretched out her arm, and began to pull the trigger at the car in front. Bang, bang, bang. Fierce gunshots rang out, but because the two cars were too fast and the distance was too far, and Sobian kept driving the car left and right, Chanel's first few bullets either hit the glass or the back of the car, and none of them hit the vital parts. Luo An frowned slightly when he saw this, but this was normal. After all, the distance was still a little far, so he increased his speed again and chased after it. Bang, bang, bang. In the car in front, seeing that the SUV was getting closer and closer to him, and the bullets fired by the other party aiming at the tires were getting more and more accurate, and he didn't know when it would hit, Sobian was full of anger and cursed. After a few seconds of hesitation, a fierce look flashed in his eyes. He bit his back teeth and suddenly turned the steering wheel, pulling the handbrake. The car made a long turn on the road and turned back. But he stepped on the accelerator to the bottom, and the front of the car was lifted up and rushed forward. Sobian drove the car directly towards the SUV. Seeing that the other party was rushing towards him desperately, China's face suddenly changed. While shooting wildly, she shouted, "Roan, be careful. Michelle, go to Chinil." Seeing that the other party was going to crash into him and die together, Roan's eyes suddenly flashed coldly. He reached out and quickly grabbed Michelle, stuffed her into Chinil, the co-pilot, then turned the steering wheel, stepped on the brake, and pulled the handbrake. The SUV instantly crossed the middle of the road and blocked Sobian's car with the back half of the SUV. Bang! With a loud bang, the two cars collided instantly. The huge impact force caused the SUV to skid to the right uncontrollably, and the back half left, making way for Sobian's car. Because of the collision, all the airbags of Sobian's car exploded, and the front of the car was dented. The ground was full of parts from both cars. The car was in a terrible state, but Sobian was smiling because he won the bet. He judged that the people in the SUV did not have the courage to gamble their lives with him, and would definitely make way for him, giving him a chance to leave. But, cutting through the airbags that blocked his view, he stepped on the accelerator, and the engine sound was a bit muffled but still usable. There was a lot of blood on his head, and Sobian ignored the pain. His mouth was grinning to his ears, and he coughed, ready to spit at the SUV next to him and drove away. Then Sobian suddenly saw a black ball flying towards the back seat of his car. Before Sobian could open his eyes to see the specific appearance of the ball, an extremely dazzling white light suddenly burst out, followed by a deafening explosion. Boom. The window glass, which was already more than half broken, completely shattered and fell to the ground at the moment of the explosion. Sobian, who was in close contact with the explosion, felt extremely painful in his eyes and ears, as if he was blind and deaf. Stun grenade? Sobian, who came from the military, instantly understood what the other party had just asked him to throw. He was furious and cursed in his heart. He pinched his wound hard, using the pain to force himself not to faint. Sobian decided that it was most important to leave here quickly. Even though his vision was very blurry, he stepped on the accelerator without hesitation. Bang! The car hit the back half of the SUV again, because the next action of Roan, after throwing the stun grenade, was to shift gears and back up, using the SUV to block Sobian's car again. Because Roan pulled Michelle and Chinia into Chinia's arms before the collision, they only had some scratches, and the situation was not serious. After the stun grenade exploded, the two women immediately ran down the SUV, holding their pistols and aiming at Sobian in the car, shouting, "Don't move. Put your hands up." As time passed, Sobian's vision gradually recovered a little. Although it was still blurry, he could see Chinia and her pistol clearly. "Damn your cousin." Sobian was furious and yelled, "Do you know how important what I'm going to do is? This is." Before Sobian could finish his words, Luo An kicked open the damaged door of the SUV and walked down, reaching out to pull Sobian out of the car. Sobian was still shouting various greetings in his mouth, but Luo An was very calm. He rubbed his slightly bruised arm and said expressionlessly, "Stop swearing. It's really boring to repeat these few words over and over again. How about we talk about the nuclear warhead first? For example, why did you snatch it?" Chapter 669. The reason for seizing the nuclear bomb. Independence. Not only Roan was puzzled as to why Sobian wanted to seize the nuclear warhead, but Chino and Michelle were also very curious. Mona and Lassie on the other end of the communicator also held their breath silently, ready to listen to Sobian's reasons. Sobian did not answer immediately, but looked Roan up and down carefully and asked, "You are Roan Greenwood, the head of the investigation team in the FBI Washington headquarters, right?" Without waiting for Roan to answer, Sobian sneered and leaned back and lay directly on the ground. "Even worse than the FBI, Cairo Silly is really a waste." Seeing that Sobian was beating around the bush and not answering the question directly, Chinel frowned and asked sternly, "Answer the question, Sobian. Where is the nuclear warhead? What do you plan to do by stealing it?" The fact that it was transported away by train was only an inference. Mona had not received any definite news yet, and there was still a possibility that the inference was wrong, so it was necessary to get an accurate answer from Sobian. "I sent him away." Sobian laughed and said without further ado, "I sent him away by train. According to the time, he should be arriving in Austin soon." Michelle asked immediately, "Why did you do that?" Sobian put away the smile on his face and said loudly with a righteous face, "I want to lead Texas to the right path and restore its independence." Sobian said that this operation, to find the missing nuclear warhead, was a secret operation within the military. Not many people knew about it, so the people sent were not of high rank. Sobian was a staunch supporter of the idea of Texas independence, and because of this, his promotion speed was very slow. Although the federal army did not say it clearly, ideological assessment was also an important item in the assessment. Sobian's idea of splitting the federation would naturally not be liked or valued by his superiors. After learning that he was included in this secret operation, Sobian realized that the opportunity was rare, so he quickly made his own plan, intending to find the nuclear warhead first and use the knowledge in the art of war to smuggle the nuclear warhead into the capital of Texas. When Captain Jolly leads his men to find him, Sobian will directly detonate the nuclear warhead, kill Jolly and others, and throw all the blame on Jolly and others. Then go to the place where the nuclear warhead exploded. Sobian will tell the victims that this is a conspiracy of the federal government. They don't care about Texas, the needs and safety of the people of Texas, and the damage caused to the public security of Texas by those smuggled people. In short, everything is the fault of the federal government. This time the nuclear warhead was a secret operation of the federal government. The tragedy was caused by not telling the truth to the people. As a native Texan, Sobian couldn't stand the federal government's deception of his own people, so he decided to come out and reveal it all. Finally, he used public opinion to hold a referendum, and Texas became independent and opposed the federation. After Sobian finished speaking, the air was quiet. Luo An was a little emotional. Let's not discuss whether Sobian can succeed. From the perspective of time alone, he did it a while early. In a few years, he would not have to do anything. Texas would start to oppose the Federation and seek independence because of immigration issues, and with the support and solidarity of several other states, the momentum would be even greater. Chinia and Michelle were also very speechless. After a few seconds of silence, Chinia sneered and asked, "You bet in your plan that Jolly would not report that you stole the nuclear warhead, but would he do so?" "Of course he would do so. I know him too well." Sobian smiled and said, "Although Jolly is afraid of trouble, he dare not cause trouble. I'm Jolly's subordinate." As long as I steal the nuclear warhead behind Jodalai's back, and it is exposed, Jodalai's future will definitely not be good. In addition, Jodalai finally climbed to the position of captain by marrying a colonel's daughter. He would never allow such a thing to happen. So Jodalai's only choice was to suppress the news and quickly snatch the nuclear warhead back from Sobian. After hearing what Sobian said, Chinia and Michelle looked at each other and breathed a sigh of relief, and then looked at Luo An with admiration. They did not comment on what Kao Siloi did, but at least Luo An really found the nuclear warhead and confirmed that the nuclear warhead was transported by that train and found someone to intercept it. Seeing Chinia and Michelle's eyes, Sobian's eyes moved slightly and realized something. He turned to look at Luo An and asked with a smile, "Have you sent someone to intercept that train?" Seeing that Sobian was not angry about the failure of the plan and was even very calm, Chinia and Michelle's heart skipped a beat. Their faces changed slightly and they asked, "What do you mean?" A lot of possibilities flashed through the minds of the two women, such as there was an ambush on the train, or the nuclear warhead was not there at all, and Sobian lied to them, etc. "It's nothing." Seeing that Luo An's expression was calmer than his own, Sobian, who wanted to laugh at him, frowned slightly, and a trace of dissatisfaction emerged in his heart. He snorted coldly and said, "The nuclear warhead is indeed on that train, but it doesn't matter whether I'm caught or not, because it has been installed with a countdown device. As long as the time is up, it will definitely explode." Sobian himself could not do something like independence. He had many like-minded people. Even if he died, those people would continue to move forward. Fouquet, St. Chinia and Michelle took a breath of cold air when they heard this. One of them turned pale and the other turned black. Sobian saw this scene and burst into laughter. Ha 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 ha. After laughing a few times, Sobian gradually stopped. His mouth slowly closed and his face became a little stiff. Because Luo An was still very calm, just looking at him quietly. Sobian's face twitched. Before he could ask, Chinia and Michelle looked at Roan and whispered, "Roan, don't panic." Roan pressed his hand to signal Chinia and Michelle not to panic. He took out his phone to check the time. He smiled at Sobian and asked, "Mr. Sobian, don't you wonder why I have been standing here and not escorting you out of this area?" Sobian frowned slightly. Before he could think carefully, a rumbling sound suddenly came from a distance. He subconsciously turned his head to look in the direction of the sound. Chinia and Michelle also turned their heads and saw smoke and dust rolling on the road in the distance and sand all over the sky. More than 20 federal military off-road vehicles formed a long line and drove towards here at a high speed. In the sky above these off-road vehicles, 4 Apache military helicopters painted in dark green camouflage and equipped with various weapons were rumbling all the way, aiming directly at this area. The helicopter was moving very fast. The 8 Apaches that had arrived above Roan and his group did not land, but circled around them, rumbling and exerting a strong pressure. Not long after, a long line of military off-road vehicles followed closely behind them with billowing smoke and dust, and also surrounded them in the center. The vehicles parked, and the door of one of the off-road vehicles opened. A white man who looked to be in his 50s, wearing a federal military uniform, and with a very serious face, walked towards them surrounded by a group of federal soldiers. Seeing the star on the other person's shoulder, except for Roan, the other 3 people all changed their expressions. Chapter 670, the phone call before. In the Federal Army, lieutenants and colonels are above the general level, and the number of stars on their shoulders distinguishes them. The most famous 5-star general is the man who likes to hold a pipe in his mouth. The white man who appeared in front of Luo An and the others, who looked to be in his 50s, had a serious face and a star on his shoulder. His rank was brigadier general. According to the Eastern level, it is roughly equivalent to the advisor or deputy commander of the division commander, assisting the division commander in commanding a division, and assisting the division level units in supervising the planning and coordination of operations. Seeing the other party coming over, although Chinia and Michelle were not in the military system, they subconsciously put away their pistols and stood up straight with serious faces. Sobian on the ground was shocked. He was lying on the ground, looking like he was in a mess, but now his eyes were full of helplessness. He subconsciously put his hands on the ground and tried to get up. The brigadier general walked up to a few people, surrounded by a group of soldiers. He ignored Chinia and Michelle, and did not look at Subian on the ground. Instead, he looked directly at Roan and said expressionlessly, "Are you Roan Greenwood?" "Yes, Mr. Brigadier General." Roan nodded neither humbly nor arrogantly. Because he did not know the other party's name, he could only call him by his military rank. Then he pointed at Subian on the ground and said, "This is the mastermind who stole the nuclear warhead." "Yeah." The brigadier general nodded without saying anything, and waved his hand casually. A group of soldiers behind him immediately rushed up, pulled Subian up from the ground, and controlled him firmly. "Wait a minute." Just as a soldier was about to stuff something into Subian's mouth, Subian quickly turned his head to avoid it, and at the same time, looked at Luo An and shouted loudly, "I succeeded, right? The nuclear warhead has exploded, right? I succeeded." Subian's voice was a little broken, because he was too excited. The brigadier general frowned slightly, turned around and looked at him, and said coldly, "The nuclear warhead will not explode, take it away." The brigadier general said the first sentence to Subian, and the second sentence to the soldiers. Subian struggled violently. When he heard this, his face flushed with anger, and he tried his best to figure out what was going on. The soldiers beside him were too lazy to talk nonsense, and directly stuffed something like a rag into his mouth to prevent Subian from biting off his tongue, and then pulled him to walk quickly towards the helicopter in the distance. Hearing the brigadier general's words, Chinia and Michelle also looked puzzled, so they turned their eyes to Luo An. Luo An smiled and explained, "I don't know the details, I just know that the detonator inside the nuclear warhead has been damaged. The chemical and physical principles behind nuclear bombs are too profound, and Luo An has not studied them deeply, almost nothing. However, Luo An is more clear about the process of starting the bomb explosion, that is, through a detonator, the components that will actually explode are detonated. From a macro perspective, the process of starting the nuclear warhead explosion is not much different from that of an ordinary bomb explosion." Michelle blinked. She did understand the theoretical principles behind nuclear bombs. Chinia found another problem. "How did you know about this?" "I made a phone call last night." Looking at the Apache helicopter gradually rising in the distance, Luo An smiled and said, "I asked someone to help contact the Deputy Minister of Defense. Last night, when Chinia and Lassie were taking a nap together, while waiting for the helicopter, Luo An planned to find someone to help intercept it, because he was worried that the nuclear warhead had been moved by Subian in advance, and he was too busy to do it. The FBI could not provide much help in this regard. It was not that Verines did not help, but the FBI's own work was only for simple explosives, such as TNT, plastic bombs, etc. Nuclear warheads were beyond the capabilities of the FBI's explosives disposal department. They could identify and even dismantle them, but they were not capable of dealing with nuclear radiation in case of an emergency. The only organization capable of dealing with nuclear warheads was the military. Luo An took out his mobile phone and called Verines about this matter at the beginning, hoping that Verines would contact the military. As a result, the military kept beating around the bush with Verines for some reason, and Verines was so angry that her body was shaking, but she had no way to deal with it. Luo An pondered for a while after learning about this, and took out his mobile phone to call again. The person he contacted this time was the female reporter Louise with a fox-like face, whose father was a deputy minister of the Federal Department of Defense. After listening to Luo An's simple description, the deputy minister's phone was silent for a long time, and the voice rang again a few minutes later. The deputy minister told Roan that the nuclear warhead would not explode, and said that the army in the Texas area would be ready to deal with the nuclear warhead. Roan only needed to lead people to capture Subian and determine the specific location of the nuclear warhead. Because of this, Roan was not panicked when Subian shouted arrogantly before. He had asked Mona to send the message at that time, and the army would send people to deal with the train. After listening to Roan's explanation, Chinia and Michelle's doubts not only did not decrease, but became more, such as what was going on with the group of military who were going around in circles with Verines. Roan could not answer, and he had not figured it out yet. It happened that the brigadier general had not left yet, so he exchanged a few simple greetings and asked about the situation in this regard. You did a great job on this nuclear warhead incident, Team Leader Greenwood. The Brigadier General reached out and patted Roan's arm, praising him expressionlessly. There are very few outstanding young people like you now, even in the military. Emotional perception sensed the other party's friendly attitude, and that what he said was true. Roan accepted the other party's compliment calmly, but did not comment on the latter sentence, that there were fewer outstanding talents in the Federal Army. As the wave of political correctness intensifies in the future, there will definitely be a lot of people with one of the 97 genders in the Federal Army. With the participation of Lugtkayapixru Plus and other, the Federal Army will surely have an endless stream of outstanding talents in the future. Without saying much about this matter, Roan got to the point and asked about the military that had been beating around the bush with Verinus. The Brigadier General picked up his phone and looked at it. He did not answer Luo An's question and said, "The nuclear warhead has been successfully handled. There was no explosion and no radiation leakage. It is well preserved. Team Leader Greenwood, let my people help you deal with your wounds and then take you to a nearby city to rest." Seeing that the other party did not answer, Chinia and Michelle, who had been listening silently, frowned slightly. Luo An and the Brigadier General looked at each other for a few seconds and agreed with a smile. "Thank you, Mr. Brigadier General." The Brigadier General nodded without saying anything, waved his hand to call a captain, and asked him to lead his troops to provide assistance to Luo An and his men. Lassie was still at the big rock before, carefully guarding Sobian's men who were stunned and injured by the explosion. The Brigadier General also sent people to take them all away, and Lassie and Luo An and his men drove to a nearby city. After arriving safely in Austin, the capital of Texas, everyone rested for a while and Winslow returned from Colorado to the group. He introduced the situation he encountered. Captain Jolly finally led his men to break into the farm. When he was about to lead his men to leave, a new group of military appeared and took Captain Jolly away directly. In the restaurant's private room, Lassie took a big bite of lamb chops, turned to look at Roan, and guessed, "Is it another factional struggle within the military?" This kind of thing is common within the federal military. After all, where there are people, there are factions. In addition, there are a number of arms companies, some members of Congress, and even within the federal military-industrial complex, there are a lot of conflicts due to different levels of interest division. Maybe. Luo An stuffed a piece of beef into his mouth and said while eating, "Let's not worry about the internal affairs of the military. This case ends here. Let's eat something and have a good rest tonight. We will return to Washington tomorrow." "Okay." Several people nodded and began to lower their heads to eat. At this moment, Luo An suddenly stopped, looked up at Winslow and asked, "Winslow, have you released the people in the SUV?" "People? What people?" Chapter 671. The situation behind the case. Ophelia Modlin, 42 years old, was a member of the military who was sent to work with Roan's special investigation team in the case of the missing nuclear warhead. Before launching the search operation, Roan had communicated with Ophelia for a while and found that this woman spoke half-truths and half-lies and lied without thinking, with no change in expression. Roan chose to arrange Ophelia to be with him and observe her carefully to prevent her from making trouble at a critical moment when she acted with other members of the investigation team and harming other agents. Unexpectedly, Chanel and Lassie disappeared halfway through the investigation. When questioning Ophelia, she still lied and refused to admit that the military was involved and asked Roan to focus on finding the nuclear warhead, and Chanel and Lassie were not important. So Roan knocked Ophelia unconscious and stuffed her into the trunk of the SUV. He did this because he didn't want to continue listening to Ophelia's lies, and he wanted to find someone to save her. Second, just in case, if the military is going to harm Chinia and Lassie, he also has corresponding hostages to counter the threat, delaying time and finding a solution. Through the mine negotiation, Captain Jolly released Chinia and Lassie. Later, in order to continue to search for nuclear warheads, Roan left the SUV to Winslow, asking him to observe the situation on the farm and release Ophelia after the situation. Winslow remembered the previous order firmly, but the latter words were accidentally suppressed by the fierce battle scene on the farm. In the parking lot, Ophelia Modlin, who was released, had a red face her chest heaving violently, and her eyes widened and stared at Roan and others. Ophelia did not have diseases such as claustrophobia, nor was she afraid of the dark, because she had experienced longer prison training than this when she was young. Ophelia was not angry about these, but that people could not eat or drink for a short period of time, but internal conflicts must be resolved. This kind of thing can be postponed, but it cannot be fundamentally stopped. So at this time, the smell on Ophelia was very complicated. Selectively ignoring the murderous gaze of the other party, Luo An contacted the military and asked them to send someone to take Ophelia away. After a night's rest, he flew back to Washington DC the next morning. Winslow, Chenier and others returned to the office area of the Special Investigation Team, while Luo An went to Verine's office in the headquarters building. After knocking on the door and entering the room, Luo An smiled and said, "Good morning, sir." In the office, Verine's face looked a little ugly, but when Luo An entered the room, her face gradually calmed down and nodded, saying, "Good morning. You have worked hard on this operation." Luo An smiled and said nothing more. As usual, he sat in the chair opposite her. Verines found a folder on the table and handed it to Luo An. She said in a serious tone, "I have roughly figured out the situation on the military side." Luo An reached out to take the folder with some surprise. Verines did not keep him in suspense. She snorted and simply explained the cause and effect of the matter. Some time ago, a confidential laboratory of the military lost more than a dozen keys and 3.2 kilograms of high concentration uranium. In order to prevent himself from being demoted and dealt with, the head of the laboratory decided to suppress the matter, seize the time to find the thief who stole the key and high concentration uranium, and retrieve the lost items. It happened that the air-to-air missiles of the Cold War were discovered during this period. The head planned to let his trusted subordinates take the nuclear warheads of the air-to-air missiles, pretend to be sellers, and go to the underground black market to sell the nuclear warheads, to find the thief's traces. Only the black market for buying and selling items related to nuclear bombs has clues about other participants in the market, and finally find the thief who stole high concentration uranium and catch him. The treasure hunting star Mattia is actually the confidant of the person in charge and the helper he contacted. His plan to swap real and fake nuclear warheads also has the help of the confidant of the person in charge. Captain Jolly was sent out by the person in charge to secretly find the nuclear warheads, but his actual task was to assist and help, to ensure that the nuclear warheads were taken away and sold by Mattia, as well as to find the thief, arrest the thief, and retrieve the keys and high concentration uranium. As for Roan and others, they were just an investigation team that the person in charge had to bring in for the sake of the procedures, because finding things was within the scope of the FBI's work. Ophelia Modlin was a trusted subordinate of the person in charge, and the purpose of sending a trusted subordinate was to observe Roan and destroy the investigation activities of Roan and others at the right time. The plan was perfect, and the superior person in charge breathed a sigh of relief, waiting for the nuclear warhead to fish out clues about the thief. Then Sibian, who dreamed of Texas independence, jumped out, killed Mattia first, and then took away the nuclear warhead. The person in charge, just when the person in charge was in a state of panic and asked his trusted subordinates to prevaricate Verines, Roan made a phone call to the Ministry of Defense. Federal law stipulates that the Federal Minister of Defense, the Deputy Minister of Defense, and the Ministers of the Navy, Army, and Air Force must be civilians. The Minister of Defense is equal to the Ministers of the three armed forces, and is a federal government official. He does not have direct command over the Federal Army, but is only the chief executive. After all, nuclear-related incidents are special circumstances, and the Federal Ministry of Defense has the right to investigate and handle them. After getting the information from Luo An, a deputy minister of the Ministry of National Defense asked his subordinates to check the relevant reports on the air-to-air missile nuclear warhead incident, and then found that there were many discrepancies between the actual situation and the report. After further investigation, the incident of the loss of the key and the high concentration uranium was soon exposed. Person in charge. Some things are not as heavy as a few ounces on the scale, but they can't be weighed down by thousands of pounds on the scale. This sentence also applies to the Federation. In addition, there are many dirty things between the Ministry of National Defense and the military system, and the loss of nuclear bomb raw materials is also a kind of alternative handle. So this matter has now begun to move in other directions, such as power struggles and interest exchanges. After listening to Verinus's words, Luo An's eyelids twitched, and after a long silence, he looked up and asked, "Sir, this information, where did you get it from?" Verinus's story was too detailed, but it involved the military that the president couldn't get involved in, so Luo An really couldn't figure out how she got this information. Verines crossed her legs, leaned back and crossed her hands. A hint of pride flashed in her eyes, and she smiled. "Roan, this is Washington. As everyone knows, there are no secrets in Washington. Many things are secrets that the people of the Federation will never know in their lifetime, but they are nothing to some people in Washington, D.C. For example, the top secret files in a certain president's garage. The Federal Army is self-contained and integrated, so it is difficult to get the information you want. But the Department of Defense is in Washington, and the people in the Department of Defense are all federal government officials. The confidentiality awareness of federal government officials is second only to those of the British Empire." Looking at Verines, who was holding her head high and looking a little proud, Roan's mouth twitched. I don't know whether I should admire Verines's strong network of contacts or cite the strong confidentiality awareness of federal government personnel. Throwing these messy thoughts behind my head, Roan opened the folder in his hand and found that it had nothing to do with the missing nuclear warhead case, but was the follow-up of the previous explosion. Roan skipped the boring text and moved his eyes to the end. The $1.4 million on it was very conspicuous. Luo An raised the corner of his mouth. Just as he was about to speak, his cell phone suddenly rang. He pressed the answer button and a familiar charming voice sounded. "Team Leader Luo An, I have helped you. Now it's your turn to help me." Chapter 672 Bonus. Winslow asks for leave. After leaving Verine's office with the documents and taking the elevator down, Roan had a slightly strange expression on his face. The person who called him just now was the female reporter Louise, but Louise did not specify what she wanted Roan to do for her. She only said that there was a dinner party next weekend and she asked someone to send Roan an invitation. After thinking for a moment, Roan temporarily put the matter in his heart and left the building to return to the Special Investigation Team's office area. When he returned to the Special Investigation Team's office area, Chinia, Michelle and others were cleaning. They were away for the past few days, and there was more or less dust on their workstations. Irritability, good news. Clapping his hands to attract the attention of the detectives, Roan shook the folder in his hand and smiled. "The salary and bonus have been paid, and I have sent them to you. Hurry up and check the text messages on your mobile phone to see if there are any mistakes or omissions in the inspection." Chinia and Michelle's eyes lit up, and Winslow and Lassie quickly found their mobile phones. The salary of each agent in the Special Investigation Team is not high, except for Luo An, who is the team leader, who gets a little more. The salary of others is the same as that of senior agents in the regulations, which is no different from ordinary agents in other investigation teams. The difference lies in the bonus. In addition to the basic bonus, after solving the case, Luo An's Special Investigation Team always gets some extra rewards. For example, in the operation of the Serrals case, Luo An finally calculated that the total cost of the operation was less than $800,000. Verinus felt that Luo An's calculation ability was too poor. After working in the FBI for so long, he actually forgot the accounting knowledge he learned in college. After carefully recalculating for Luo An, Verinus indeed found a lot of mistakes. After correcting them one by one, the final number became $1.4 million. Luo An. In addition to this case handling fund, there are also underground arms discussed with the CIA before the operation began. The amount of that money is about $5.7 million. After Verinus and Roland, a CIA agent who successfully entered the management, urged, the money was also deposited into the account provided by Luo An today, and the final number was $5.73 million. Verines, Roan's superior, and CIA agent Roland and his superior all gained something after the case was over. except for being voluntarily paid a large sum of money and still wrangling procedures with certain federal departments and expecting that it would be impossible to transfer Serals to their own British Empire Me6 within 10 years. Everyone was very satisfied. Me6. Roan kept $500,000 of the $1.4 million to fill the special investigation team's case handling funds, and the remaining $900,000 was divided between Roan and the other 5, with $300,000 and $120,000 each. Roan took $2.1 million of the $5.7 million for arms, and Mona, Lassie and the other 5 took $700,000 each. The remaining small change was kept as the special investigation team's case handling funds as usual. Wow. Seeing the numbers in their mobile phone messages, the eyes of all the agents lit up immediately. Winslow and Chanel smiled happily, Lassie laughed loudly, and Michelle and Mona were also very excited. Luo An chuckled and put away the folder, saying, "Everyone, don't forget the follow-up work of this missing nuclear warhead case. Although the participants in the case have been taken away by the military, the relevant reports still need to be written." "No problem." Winslow and Chenia nodded repeatedly, and Lassie patted her chest and promised loudly, "Leave these writing work to us." Michelle didn't say much as usual, and quietly took the part of the report that Luo An needed to write to her workstation. Because the follow-up work of this case was not urgent, and it was noon, the detectives of the special investigation team called someone to send some food to the office area, and they ate and chatted while taking a break. There was laughter in the office area, and Lassie, Mona, Chenia and Michelle gathered together to study the newly launched women's clothing, handbags and other items. Winslow couldn't get a word in, so he simply swallowed the beef in his mouth, moved his chair to Roan, smiled, and said, "Roan, I want to take a day off." After finishing the first barbecue and throwing the box into the trash can, Roan then opened a second barbecue takeaway and asked vaguely while eating, "Reason? You know, I divorced my ex-wife." Winslow took a sip of the drink and explained, "After the divorce, the son was awarded to her by the court, and the mother and son have been living together." Roan nodded while eating barbecue. In the previous bank gas case, he had seen Winslow's ex-wife, named Lanita, a woman who was a head taller than Roan. After Lanita divorced Winslow, she lived alone with her son for a while, and then married her current husband. Roan didn't pay attention to the current husband's name, but only remembered that he worked in a chemical company, was not tall, a little shorter than himself, and was the type of woman taller than the man with Lanita. After swallowing the barbecue, Luo An asked with a smile, "Are you going to take little Jimmy out for a day again?" Jimmy is the name of Winslow's son, who is still in elementary school. When he just got divorced, Winslow didn't have much money, so he could only watch Lanita live with Jimmy from afar. After joining Luo An's investigation team, Winslow's financial situation became better and better. He would take time to discuss with Lanita, buy gifts for Jimmy, and take Jimmy to the amusement park, zoo and other places, to have a good day. This happened several times, and except for occasional special circumstances, Luo An never refused Winslow's request as a father. Roan thought that the reason for Winslow's leave this time was the same as usual, but unexpectedly Winslow shook his head and said, "No, this time it's not Jimmy, it's Lanita, she's divorced." Hearing this, a question mark popped up in Roan's head. He stopped eating barbecue and asked, "So, you are?" Winslow's expression was a little complicated. He was happy, but he was embarrassed to show it. There was also a hint of embarrassment. He replied, "I plan to remarry Lanita." Winslow's words attracted the attention of several women next to him. Lassie immediately moved her chair over and asked with a smile, "You secretly interfered in Lanita and her current husband's family affairs, making it impossible for them to live together, and forced to divorce." Winslow rolled his eyes, picked up a candy, and threw it to Lassie. "I have never interfered in their family affairs. I just learned about Lanita's divorce. I heard from her friends that it seemed to be because of work problems." Lassie smiled, picked up the candy, opened the package, and put it in her mouth. Chenia next to her came over and asked, "Have you discussed the matter of remarriage with Lanita?" Winslow spread his hands, turned to look at Luo An, and said, "I asked for leave this time just to talk to her." "Okay, no problem." Luo An nodded and agreed. Anyway, the current work was neither urgent nor busy, and Winslow's day off was not a big deal. Thank you. Winslow's tone was sincere. Luo An patted his shoulder, then turned to look at Lassie and smiled. Winslow asked for leave, and the content of the documents he was responsible for that day will be handed over to you, Lassie. After a while of playing around, everyone who had finished lunch began to deal with the follow-up documents, and time quickly came to the end of get off work. Winslow was a little anxious, packed up his things, said hello and left quickly, and the other few people walked out of the building slowly and drove home. They stopped at the traffic light and waited. Mona in the driver's seat yawned and asked, Luo An, what are we having for dinner tonight? Chapter 673, Dinner. Roan was fiddling with his phone in the passenger seat of the car. Hearing Mona's question, he looked up and smiled. Remember before the missing nuclear warhead case, ICE director Elmer invited us to his house for dinner? Mona thought for a moment and recalled, and asked, did he send you a message again? Yes. Roan showed the text message to Mona. He received the message not long after the special investigation team returned to Washington, D.C. The red light turned green. Mona started the car and continued to move forward. The two returned to the villa to rest for a while, changed clothes and drove to Elmer's house. Elmer's house is located in the east of Washington, D.C. It is a medium-sized villa with a very common appearance. There is a large lawn in front of the villa. Good evening. In front of the villa, Roan and Elmer hugged each other, and Roan handed a bottle of red wine to each other, a small gift. Thank you. Elmer laughed and led Roan into the villa. His wife Kate and Mona walked into the living room together. There were two girls sitting on the sofa in the center of the villa's living room. The older girl was named Zyrani, and Roan had attended her coming-of-age ceremony. The younger girl was named Bella, the second daughter of Elmer and his wife. Good evening, ladies. Good evening. Roan smiled and waved to the two girls. Mona took out two small pieces of jewelry and gave them to them. The two girls opened the box with bright eyes and smiled. Thank you, Sister Mona. Thank you, Uncle Roan. Roan. Elmer's wife Kate patted the two girls hard, and the two girls left the living room with Mona with a smile. Roan didn't care about this little joke and walked into the study with Elmer, while Elmer's wife went to the kitchen to prepare food. The two sat down in the study, and Roan asked casually, how is the Ponzi scheme case of Madoff being handled? Madoff is very cooperative, and we have almost handled it. The main task is to transfer funds to those middle-class families who have been deceived. Elmer found a bottle of red wine, opened it and poured a glass for Roan and himself, and took the initiative to clink glasses with Roan, with a very sincere smile on his face. There are many people and things involved in this case. If Roan had not given him advice and introduced Mr. Clement and FBI Director Robert to him, the situation would probably not have been so smooth. It is not impossible that he was shot in the back and was determined to be suicide. Roan smiled and took a sip of the wine glass. Elmer finished his drink and found a cigar and asked, I heard that the case you are handling this time is related to the military? Elmer handed the cigar to Roan. Roan took it, but did not smoke it. He nodded and asked, where did you hear it? Just ask around, and you will know. Elmer lit the cigar and said, there are no secrets in Washington, D.C. Roan frowned slightly. This was the second time he heard this sentence today. If he is a click collector, this situation is indeed very beneficial to him. But if he wants to hide something, this sentence also means that some situations are very troublesome. Seeing the expression on Roan's face, Elmer raised his lips slightly and asked, are you thinking about how to keep your case secret? Yes. Roan did not hide. If some information is leaked in the process of handling a case in the future, it will be quite troublesome later. Seeing Roan frowning slightly, Elmer exhaled a puff of cigar and said, it's actually very simple. Only people are interested in information and only people will leak information. People are the carriers of information dissemination. In Washington, D.C., a lot of information is not unknown to others, but people who know these information will not say it, or dare not say it. Roan understood the meaning of Elmer's words. The other party did not ask him to get rid of the person who spread the news, but he needed to get to know more people. Various thoughts flashed through Roan's mind. He picked up the water cup and raised it, and began to talk about other things with Elmer. Not long after, Elmer's second daughter knocked on the door of the study, indicating that dinner was ready. Wow. Roan walked into the kitchen with Elmer and his second daughter, and his eyes lit up when he saw the dishes on the table. The food on the table included vegetable salads common in the Federation, as well as roasted beef and lamb, but the most eye-catching thing was the red lobsters. Because the Federation adopted a separate dining system, there was a cheese-baked lobster with its shell removed, and cheese covering most of its body in front of each seat at the table. In the middle of the table, there were 2 huge lobsters that were, as long as an adult's arm, split in half vertically, and baked at high temperature, until they were completely red. The shrimp meat looked slightly burnt, but the surface was actually very crispy, and exuded a rich aroma. Seeing that, Roan was a little surprised. Director Elmer's wife Kate smiled and introduced, "This is a Boston lobster." Roan Greenwood's hometown is Boston, where he lived with his parents since he was a child. He left Boston for New York until his parents died, and he became an adult. Although Boston lobsters are actually Maine lobsters, and have little to do with the city of Boston itself, Roan still felt the kindness of the Elmer family, smiled, and said, "I can't wait to try it." "Then try it quickly." Elmer patted Roan on the shoulder, sat down at the table with Roan, and said with a smile, "Believe me, you will definitely love this dish. Marrying Kate is the luckiest thing in my life." Kate rolled her eyes at Elmer, smiled and sat down with Mona. The 2 girls drank drinks, and the 4 adults picked up their glasses and clinked them. Cheers. Kate's cooking skills are really great. Whether it is cheese-baked lobsters or Boston lobsters, Roan feels that they taste even comparable to the dishes made by some restaurants outside. After talking, Roan and Mona learned that Kate had some minor health problems after giving birth to her second daughter. In addition, Elmer's salary and bonus were not low, so Kate quit her job and went home to rest. Making dishes is one of her hobbies. The dinner was a great pleasure for both the host and the guests. After the meal, they had some fruit and chatted for a while before Roan and Mona stood up and prepared to leave. Before leaving, Kate brought them some special pickles she made herself, as well as a family recipe book she made herself. The dishes in it were not only delicious, but also easy to make. Half an hour later, the 2 returned to the villa. Luo An put the pickled vegetables he brought back into the refrigerator for storage. Mona sat on the sofa and looked at the recipe in amazement, then looked up and smiled. "Luo An, we don't have to eat potatoes and beef next time. The dishes here are enough for us to eat different ones for a month." Luo An sat down on the sofa, his body tilted, his head resting on Mona's thighs, and asked with a smile, "One question. Do you cook, or do I cook?" "Of course you do." Mona put the recipe aside, lowered her head and smiled. "Your cooking is better than mine." "What about washing the dishes?" "Your job is to wash them too, because you wash them cleaner than I do." "Then what do you do?" "I'm responsible for eating and giving you scores." Luo An raised his eyebrows and was about to speak, but Mona immediately reached out to cover his mouth, changing the subject. "By the way, Caroline called me yesterday and said she had something to talk to you about. I asked her what it was, but she didn't say anything and insisted that you call her. What's going on?" Luo An. Chapter 674, Potion Harvest. Roan Bryan. In a beautiful villa in the west of Washington, D.C., Roan finally called Caroline, but in front of Mona, with the phone volume turned up to the maximum. "Good evening, Caroline." "Good morning, Roan." Caroline on the other end of the phone yawned loudly, her voice lazy. "Did you forget the time difference? I'm in the British Empire now, 5 hours ahead of you." Roan raised his eyebrows. He did forget the time difference, but this matter was not important. He asked directly, "Mona said you wanted to see me. What's the matter?" Mona, who was sitting next to him, rolled her eyes at Roan, crossed her arms over her chest, and looked at her phone quietly. "I'm not looking for you. I just said that to piss Mona off. She's funny when she's angry." Caroline on the other end of the phone giggled, while Mona's face slowly darkened. Roan's mouth twitched, and he quickly interrupted Caroline and asked, "Let's talk business first. If you're not looking for me, then who is looking for me?" "It's not you either, or other. The other party is not looking for Roan." Caroline's laughter slowly stopped and she explained, "The other party is looking for Bryan. Some time ago, Caroline opened a company in the British Empire because the comprehensive tax here is lower than in Europe, and there is also EU trade protection. In the process of handling company affairs, a very beautiful woman came to the door and asked for Brian by name. Brian? Hearing this name, Mona frowned immediately, clenched her hands subconsciously, and looked up at Roan. The name Brian was one of the fake names Roan used to lead Mona and Caroline to Europe when Mona's father Javery Evans disappeared a long time ago. He was a private detective. Roan also used several fake names such as Tom and Jerry at that time. After successfully rescuing Javery Evans, names like Brian were completely abandoned, and Roan's true identity was only known by Mona, Caroline, Javery Evans, and Mrs. Hanover. Mona became very nervous when she heard the name Brian again today because they had made a lot of good friends during that operation. Thousands of thoughts and coping plans flashed through Luo An's mind, but his expression was very calm. He asked, "What did the other party want to talk to me about?" "I don't know," the woman didn't say. Caroline yawned again and said, "But I asked for you." She said she can reimburse your air ticket and provide food and accommodation for free. Mona frowned, looked up at Luo An, and guessed, could it be that your true identity has been exposed? Probably not. Before Luo An could speak, Caroline's voice sounded again on the other end of the phone. "I checked the identity of the woman, and she is a descendant of an old noble in the British Empire. Several people died in the family of that old noble some time ago. I suspect that the other party came to Luo An for help and asked him to help solve the case, just like Sherlock Holmes in the novel. Just pretend that this never happened." After a moment of hesitation, Luo An narrowed his eyes and said, "Brian is dead and has retired from the private detective business on a physical level." "Okay." Caroline on the other end of the phone smiled. She knew that Roan would choose this, but it was still necessary to tell him about it. After a brief chat, Caroline, who wanted to catch up on her beauty sleep, hung up the phone. Mona on the other end of the phone was worried. She put her phone aside. Roan reached out and hugged Mona into his arms, saying that there was no need to panic. There was always a way to solve the problem. However, doing nothing and waiting was not the best solution, so Roan asked Mona for her phone and prepared to call Jolie to ask him to check the identity of the old noble woman mentioned by Caroline. "I'll do it. I'll call him." Mona immediately took out her phone and prepared to talk to Jolie herself. After all, she went to rescue Jolie in the first place, and she would never agree if Jolie didn't help. Jolie, who was in the wrong on the other end of the phone, agreed to Mona's investigation request without hesitation. But Mona still felt worried. After a few discussions, she asked Jolie to take out $500,000 to investigate the matter carefully. Seeing his daughter using the skill of elbowing outwards and being more worried about Roan than himself, Javery, who was upset, silently transferred $500,000 and hung up the phone. Caroline's matter came to an end for the time being, and the investigation information would not be released in a short time. Mona and Roan chatted for a while, and it was late, so they got upstairs to rest. The next day, in the office area of the Special Investigation Team, Winslow was absent on leave, and the others sat at their respective workstations to deal with the follow-up procedure files of the case. Roan, as the leader of the investigation team, also sat behind the computer in the leader's office, looking serious, slacking off. During the lunch break, Lassie, Chinelle, Mona and Michelle, who had finished lunch, gathered together to chat and gossip. Roan returned to the leader's office, closed his eyes to rest, and opened a system page in his mind. Nuclear warhead lost case. The system gave Roan a rare evaluation of extremely excellent and accumulated 6 treasure chests. The rough cutscene ended, and the 6 treasure chests opened. Stamina Potion X2, Hemastasis Potion X1, Swiftness Potion X1, Antidote Potion X2. Then the system warehouse page was opened, and there were a total of Stamina Potion X8, Hemastasis Potion X9, Antidote Potion X7, Swiftness Potion X8, Regeneration Potion X7, Strength Potion X4, Sensitivity Potion X1, Analgesic Potion X8, Featherfall Potion X7, Aqualung Potion X3. Still no Danger Sense Potion, Strength Potion, Swiftness Potion, etc., which seemed to be disposable potions. Not long after each use, the effect would disappear. But every time the effect disappeared by 90% or even 95%, there would always be a small part of the effect that would remain in Luo An's body permanently. Over time, Luo An's strength and speed were gradually increasing at a slow but perceptible speed. Stamina potion is also slowly increasing Luo An's stamina limit. Every weekend, Mona, who plays poker with Luo An, will be very tired the next day and don't want to get up. In addition, the requirements for active duty soldiers in the Eastern Army are that they must complete 45 standard push-ups within 2 minutes to be qualified, 60 to be excellent, and 100 to show off. The number of push-ups that has been clearly recorded in the world is 2,902 done by a soldier in the East at one time. Luo An has not calculated it according to time, but judging from the number alone, he did 600 standard push-ups in one breath when he was exercising in the villa room some time ago and didn't feel tired. If Mona hadn't entered the room to give him fruit, Luo An felt that he could do another 600. There is also the most energy consuming long distance running project. Luo An tried the treadmill in the villa and took 39 minutes to run 10,000 meters. There is indeed a big gap from the world record of 10,000 meters in 26 minutes and 11 seconds, but Luo An has not received long distance running training. He ran completely by feeling. At the same time, he did not feel particularly tired or dehydrated, and he could even continue. This means that he has excellent speed and burst in a short distance and a short time, and his endurance for long distance running is far beyond many people. Luo An continued to ponder the bonus of other potions to himself. At this time, the office door was knocked and pushed open. Lassie shook the item in her hand. Luo An, there is an invitation letter for you. Chapter 675 Dinner, Ministry of National Defense. Taking the things Lassie handed over, Luo An opened it and found that it was the invitation letter that the female reporter Louise had mentioned before, inviting him to attend a certain dinner party. The location of the dinner party was a well-known high-end hotel in Washington, D.C. The people who went in and out of there were either rich or noble, and many of them were frequent guests of newspapers or TV reports. Wow. Seeing the content and address in the invitation letter, Lassie opened her mouth slightly and then smiled and said, "Here's a suggestion for you, Luo An. Before attending this dinner party, you should eat more to fill your stomach." Luo An turned his eyes away with some doubts. Lassie spread her hands and explained, "Dinners of this size usually have a lot of media present. In order to be on camera, the food at the dinner party is mostly for appearance, not necessarily delicious. In addition, not many people will really eat, because eating too much will easily make the stomach bloated, and if the stomach is bloated, the carefully dressed manners will be ruined. Just like the Hollywood Oscar awards ceremony, not drinking water, not eating, not going to the bathroom for several hours, and always tightening their muscles and lower abdomen. This kind of thing is normal for those female stars." For more than half a month, Luo An was openly taking advantage of the situation. He went to work on time and got off work on time every day. He ate and drank during the day, exercised at night, and rested and played with Mona on weekends. The life of a tax thief was extremely happy. At 7 o'clock on Sunday night, Luo An changed into a high-end suit and drove to the dinner venue. At this time, a large number of media gathered at the gate, and all kinds of long guns and short guns were pointed at the open area in front of the hotel gate. Seeing this scene, Luo An quietly parked the car far away, walked around the side of these media, and walked into the hotel slowly. There were not many guests at this time, and many service staff in the luxuriously decorated hall were doing the final inspection and sorting. Luo An glanced around, walked to the buffet not far away, and began to taste the food he had never seen before. Good evening. Not long after, when Luo An was tasting a kind of shellfish from the polar regions under the introduction of the service staff, a familiar female voice sounded behind him. The other person had her hair tied up high and was wearing a light golden backless dress. Her fox-like delicate face was lightly made up, and her eyes were very attractive to men. Picking up a glass of champagne beside Luo An, Louise raised her lips slightly and said with a smile, "I didn't expect you to come so early. Good evening." Luo An put the shellfish he didn't recognize aside, wiped his hands with a napkin, picked up the wine glass, and clinked it with Louise, and said with a smile, "I don't like those media, so I came early." Louise took a small sip of champagne and said with a smile, "I thought you would say that you were anxious to see the beautiful Miss Louise tonight." Luo An smiled and didn't respond to the other person. Seeing this, Louise rolled her eyes slightly and put the champagne aside. "Do you hate me so much?" Whether it was her face, figure, or demeanor, Louise was not inferior to those Hollywood stars. From the perspective of being pleasing to the eye, it was difficult for Luo An to say that he hated her against his conscience. But Luo An really couldn't accept the matter that Louise had proposed before to buy his white genetic material. Rather than letting Louise misunderstand, it is better to pretend to be unsympathetic. So Luo An didn't waste words and went straight to the point. "I don't know what Miss Louise asked me to help her with before. As long as it is within my ability, I will do my best to help Miss Louise. I will do my best, but I can't guarantee success, right?" Louise used her experience as a reporter to quickly find the problem in Luo An's words, wrinkled her nose, and looked at Luo An with some dissatisfaction. "What a sly guy. I feel that the FBI may not be suitable for you. You should work in Congress." Without waiting for Luo An to speak, Louise picked up a cherry and stuffed it into her mouth, turned around and said, "Come with me. Someone wants to see you." Looking at Louise's delicate and white back, Luo An had a few thoughts flashing through his mind, put down his glass and followed. Leaving the hall and walking through the corridor, Louise led Luo An into the vice hall not far away and continued to turn right. A conference room appeared in front of the two. Louise didn't knock on the door, but pushed the door and walked in. This is a standard European classical style conference room, with a long crimson table and high-backed wooden chairs, which looks more like a room in some European castle. Roan glanced at the style and decoration, and put it behind his mind, and turned his attention to the people in the room. There were 8 men sitting at the conference table, 3 on the left and 5 on the right. They were all of a certain age, and wore black suits. Seeing Louise suddenly push the door and walk into the room, the man in the middle on the left had a look of helplessness on his face, and the 5 people on the right nodded very naturally to stop discussing, got up and walked out of the room. Roan Greenwood, head of the Special Investigation Team at the FBI Washington headquarters. The door of the conference room was closed, and Louise stood in the middle and introduced the 2 parties. Deputy Minister of Defense, Hernandez. "Good evening, Mr. Minister." Roan smiled and stretched out his hand to the other party. The moment he saw the other party's face, he recognized the other party's identity. When he asked Mona to investigate Louise's background before, Roan had seen photos of her parents. This Deputy Minister Hernandez was Louise's father. "Hello." Deputy Defense Minister Hernandez smiled, stretched out his hand and shook hands with Roan, and said, "Team Leader Greenwood looks younger than in the photo." At this moment, Louise said from the side, "You guys chat, I'll be out for a while." With that, Louise turned and walked out of the meeting room. Hernandez gave a look to his men beside him, and the 2 men followed him out of the room. After a few seconds, Roan and Hernandez were the only ones left in the meeting room. "Sit down." Hernandez waved his hand, and the 2 sat down. He looked at Luo An with a smile and said, "Team Leader Luo An, I actually wanted to meet you a long time ago. I'm confused about how you attracted Louise and made her want to have a child for you." Facing the faint sense of oppression from Hernandez, Luo An was not panicked at all, and his smile remained on his face. "Mr. Minister, you got one thing wrong. Having a child is the man's idea, and having a child is the woman's idea. These are not the same thing. Louise's idea is completely the woman's idea. I didn't know about it at all, and I didn't agree to her." Seeing that Luo An was neither humble nor arrogant, Hernandez's eyes flashed with an imperceptible appreciation, and his words were still stiff. "You mean, you don't like Louise, right? In fact, I already have a girlfriend. I think Mr. Minister has investigated me, and should know this." Luo An smiled and said calmly, "I'm a dedicated man like Mr. Minister." Hernandez looked at Roan quietly, and Roan also looked back quietly. After a few seconds, the gloom on Hernandez's face suddenly disappeared, and he clapped his hands with a smile. "You are indeed a young man who is often praised by Robert. You are really excellent. Thank you." The other party was referring to FBI Director Robert, and Roan smiled and thanked him. 2 things. Hernandez had other things to do, and there was not much time left, So he turned around and took out 2 items from the briefcase next to him, handed them to Roan, and said, "The Ministry of Defense is preparing to carry out a secret operation and needs a suitable organizer. I think you are more suitable." End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.